Halloween has always been my favourite holiday for as long as I can remember. As a kid, you got to dress up as your favourite character and collect all the free candy your heart desires. As a teenager, hanging out with friends trying to creep each other out by visiting the local cemetery and calling your town's a murderous spirit that can only be summoned on Halloween night. In college, visiting every haunted house. I really thought the fun of Halloween would die off once I got older, but I was wrong. Halloween never gets less fun. It's just a different type of fun. Now, instead of going to haunted houses, I decorate my own yard, propping up creepy corpses and giant spiders. Instead of visiting the local legend's gravesite, I spend a month watching horror movies. And instead of dressing up and getting candy, I get to dress up and hand out candy. And I'm the cool house, so I only give out the best candy. Yeah, Halloween is still as fun as ever. This Halloween was one of the best yet. I gotta hand it to the parents for the work they put in. When I was a kid, we had a cheap plastic outfit and a mask that would break 20 minutes into trick-or-treating. Now, kids have legit costumes and makeup that could have been done by a pro. My favourite was a kid who had his head chopped off and sitting on a plate that he was holding while his neck would squirt blood out. That will give the smaller trick-or-treaters some nightmares for sure. He got a king-size candy bar from me, no question. This story actually happens much later that same night. It was past midnight, and I had forgotten to turn my porch light off. I was still up and about, watching The Exorcist, and I forgot to turn the light off when there was a knock at my door. That made me jump. Who the hell would be knocking on my door this late? Probably some asshole teenagers. I'll just give them their candy and turn my lights off. I opened the door, and I was shocked to see a young family on my porch. A mother, father, and 2 young girls, maybe 7 years old at the oldest. Way too late for little kids to be out, I thought. Maybe it was the late hour or the kids being out so late, but chills went down my spine. The kids were dressed as vampires. They had a cape and some blood on their mouth. Their lips were dark red, contrasted by their pale faces. The makeup job was on point. The parents were dressed up too, in old Victorian-style clothes. The mother wore a beautiful red dress, and the father a white shirt with a double-buttoned vest along with a chain watch. Honestly, they looked like they'd just stepped out of a time machine. But the thing that really creeped me out were the eyes. It's hard to explain. They didn't look different. They just made you feel, I don't know. There was this coldness behind them. Gave you an uneasy feeling. A+ costumes, I thought. I would have given him a king-size bar if I had any left. I think you guys are the last ones out, I said. One of the little girls slowly held out her empty bucket, silently. The other one was shifting uncomfortably. "Mummy, I have to go, now," she said. "Just hold it, sweetie. We can go behind a tree in a minute." "I don't want to go behind a tree," she whined. I put the candy in the buckets and felt bad for the kid. A boy can pee behind a tree, sure, but not a girl. You can use my toilet if you make it fast. She looked at her mum, who quickly stepped forward. No, we couldn't ask that of you. She can use the tree. She turned towards her daughter. We can't go into a stranger's house. You know that. It's okay, I said. You can all come in, so it's safe. She can use the bathroom. It's the second door on the left. A quick thought flashed through my mind. You're not supposed to invite vampires into your home. I've watched way too many Halloween movies this month. It's a family with kids dressed up. A weird family, sure, but vampires aren't real. The family stepped inside. The girl used the bathroom. Then they thanked me and left. No, I was not attacked or made into a vampire. I looked at my phone. It was already 1:30 in the morning. I yawned and decided it was time for bed. I changed into something more comfortable, fell asleep happily watching old Office episodes. I woke up to what sounded like footsteps in the other room. I live alone, and I'm naturally a light sleeper. I opened my eyes, and I listened. I could hear what sounded like a girl saying, "I'm hungry," then going silent. My stomach turned. Fear crept up my throat. Someone was in my house. I wanted to run, but the only way out was through my door, and it wasn't even locked. I don't own a gun or anything like that. My dad always told me that was stupid, but I live in a nice neighborhood. I never thought that anything like this would ever happen to me. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to try to run or fight. So I did what I would always do when I was a kid. I pulled the covers over my head, and I sat as still and as quiet as possible. Maybe whoever it is will just leave and not come in here. Or maybe they will not see me under the covers and just leave. I don't know how long I laid there. When you're terrified, every second seems like minutes. It was quiet at first. Then I heard the door handle turn, followed by the sound of the door slowly opening. I tried to force my body to stop shaking, but I could feel myself trembling. Against my better judgment, and against everything I've ever seen watching a horror movie, seeing the main character do something stupid, I did something stupid. I peeked out from the blanket. I did it as quietly and as slowly as possible. Maybe if I did it slow enough, they wouldn't notice. When I peeked out, I saw 4 people standing there at the edge of the doorway, staring at me. 2 adults, 2 children. It was unmistakably the late-night trick-or-treaters. "Can I eat yet?" the little girl who used my bathroom earlier asked. I locked eyes with her, and then her dad. Not a moment later, he was across the bedroom and he had me pinned down. I've never seen anyone or anything move that fast. If I blinked, I would have missed it. I screamed, "Shh, it won't hurt. You'll enjoy it, I promise." I don't know why, but I believed him. Why? Why are you doing this to me? I asked. You invited us in. He leaned down to my neck and slid his teeth in. At first, it hurt, but then I felt a slight tingling sensation. Sort of like when you go to the dentist, but without the numbness. Then it spread through my whole body, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't even talk. He let go of me, and he took the covers off. He nodded to the kids, who laughed and then ran towards the bed. They climbed on top of me and sank their teeth into my neck and began to feed. It did not hurt. My body relaxed, and the fear disappeared. Then, it stopped. I looked up, and I saw that the parents had pulled their girls away. That's enough for now, the mum said. You don't want to kill him. Save him, so you can feed on him again later. The girls pouted, but did as their parents said. Then they were gone. I was too exhausted to move, and I fell asleep immediately. I woke up the next morning thinking that it had all been a dream. I went to the bathroom, and I noticed how pale I looked. Then I looked at my neck, and I saw the 2 bite marks on each side. It wasn't noticeable, unless you knew where to look. It was real. Since the moment I woke up, I can't stop thinking about what happened. How amazing it felt. How much I want to feel that way again, and again, and again. I will do anything. I live to serve them. I hate living in London. Now, anyone born and raised here could offer you a whole catalogue of reasons as to why that's a perfectly valid statement. Traffic congestion, air pollution, premium pricing, droves of tourists from Germany to America to Zimbabwe flocking in like the bloody pigeons in Trafalgar to gawk at you on your way to work. I could go on. But, to me, those all take a back seat to the underground. Yes, that bloated network of clogged veins that tangle underneath the skin of our beautiful tourist city. It's not even the trains themselves, in all honesty. It's the people. And the sense of silent paranoia. On the underground, everyone's a terrorist or a serial murderer, and thus nobody speaks to anybody. I do my 9 to 5 in an office cubicle with dividers 6 feet high, and all my co-workers are probably a good 5'10". I get in the mornings, and 100 unanswered cold calls later, I feel like I'm an inmate doing solitary confinement. By the time I'm out in the evenings, free as a clip-winged bird, I'm just begging for someone to talk to me like a human being. But instead, I'm swallowed up by the silence of the underground. That was until last week. I found a new reason to hate the underground. But I no longer take the beauty of silent, crowded tube trains for granted. Now, I flinch if someone so much as opens their mouth in my vicinity. I take the Piccadilly line from Knightsbridge to Ruislip on a nightly basis, so letting the tides of people carry me down into the train car like some kind of jellyfish, and holding onto something that won't move until my stop is announced, feels almost like a reflex, like blinking or breathing. But last week, the entire Knightsbridge station was a ghost town. Just occasional pockets of whispering people meters apart from each other. Normally, that silence I so despised was the result of rudeness and not just a lack of people to talk to. After facing the headlong, oily wind of the tube tunnels and making my way down to the right line, noticing the eerie quiet that hangs heavy in the air when the normal busker seems to be taking the night off, I found myself facing an utterly empty platform. No word of a lie. I felt like I was Robert Neville in the empty world Richard Matheson gave him. I took a seat on one of those uncomfortable iron benches that they lay out for you. The ones that look like cheese graters with armrests. I was waiting for the 10 p.m. train to come lurching down the tracks, hemorrhaging passengers from every door and window. But again, I was wrong. Something was awfully amiss. Eventually, the train turned up, as empty as I'd ever seen it before in my entire 32 years of living here in London. I got up with more than a little trepidation when the doors opened, and upon stepping in and seeing rows of empty seats with about 1 or 2 passengers as far as the eye could see, I elected to sit near the door. The garbled voice over the intercom told his audience of 3 what they already knew, and the train jolted forward down the tracks, into the darkness of the first tunnel. I realised then that if I ever wanted to have a casual chat on my tube journey home, I'd have to be the instigator of the conversation. So I cast my mental fishing line down the train to check out the potential applicants. About 20 feet to the left of me was a heavy bearded man with a club jacket and a dirty-looking jumper, lolling over the side of his chair and snoring, a titty magazine open at his feet. Maybe not him. 20 feet to the right was a woman in a nice-looking jacket with fancy jewelry and a handbag that looked designer, reading something by Gillian Flynn. I worried that if I slid over and struck up a conversation, I'd be the one to look like a creep. Disappointed, but with only myself to blame, I receded back into my seat and I held my head in my hands. The one time the tube didn't feel like a sardine cannery, and I was too much of a wimp to talk to someone. The next stop is South Kensington. I figured I may as well take advantage of the downtime and go to sleep like the perv on the left. But while I was teetering on that weird, hazy period on the precipice of sleep, the entire train went dark. It wasn't uncommon for a light or two to fail while you're in transit, but for them to all fail at once, that was a new one for me. Stranger still, in the relative silence of the train, I could very clearly hear this weird squelching sound, like nothing I'd ever heard before. In hindsight, I can only really describe it as being like someone sifting through a pile of raw meat, if you've ever heard such a thing to make the comparison. The lights turned back on a few seconds later, and I breathed a sigh of mild relief. I've never liked the dark all that much. However, I noticed something had changed in my peripheral vision. I couldn't see that fat guy with the titty mag anymore, because two tall people with matching trench coats and hats were standing in front of him. I could bet my life and my life savings on the fact that those two guys were not on the train before the lights went out. They turned around in unison from the pervert, and I got a better look at them. What struck me first was that they both seemed so eerily similar, wearing matching trench coats and scarves that went all the way up their jawline, with neat, pleated trousers, laceless loafers, matching leather gloves, and wide-brimmed hats. They looked as though they'd just come out of some kind of noir-themed costume party, but asking them about it was hardly on my mind, as they drifted over almost weightlessly and sat across from me in silence. Their faces, they looked wrong, if that makes sense. They weren't faces that people were meant to have. They were not particularly horrific or anything, but they had this almost grey complexion, like granite. They were smooth beyond all belief. No wrinkles, no laugh lines, no moles, freckles, or scars. Nothing that could separate them from being utterly basic templates of what a human face was supposed to look like. I never knew perfection could be so ugly. "You guys clothes shop at the same place?" I said jokingly, trying to break the ice. The blank-faced strangers remained silent. I noticed one was bigger than the other, perhaps a few inches taller, with broader shoulders. It made the world of difference when they're sitting across from you, staring daggers into you. Jesus, those eyes. Big, yellowish fish eyes. Like they had jaundice or hepatitis. "Sorry," I said awkwardly, just trying to ease the tension. It's been a long day. I noticed the smaller one was holding a duffel bag that clinked like glass on glass every time the train rumbled. The perv was not lolling over the seats anymore. He was slumped forward uncomfortably, face to the ground. People don't sleep like that. The bigger one seemed to register that I had noticed that.
"Which stop belongs to you?"
he said, slowly, mechanically, like English left a foul taste in his mouth. "Pardon?" I said.
"Which stop?"
He paused, choosing his words carefully.
"Is yours?"
"Oh, Roysleb. It's a little way to go." London had plenty of non-native English speakers from pretty much any country you can name. So, meeting people who were still getting into the swing of things was by no means an irregularity. But this guy, he didn't seem to have an accent. I mean, any accent. It was like a bad text-to-speech generator. His cadence and syntax were utterly undefined, with a cluster bomb of weird, inappropriate pauses and incorrect pronunciations. "How about you?" I asked. The big one seemed to mull it over a little.
"We are stopping at..."
His eyes scanned the line map above my head.
"Acton Town."
"Oh, cool. Cool." The silence was crawling back. I didn't want to let it. This was my first semi-proper conversation on the tube, even if it was with some incredibly strange people. I wasn't going to give that up. So, do you guys work here or are you tourists? The little one cocked his head sideways, but remained silent. The big one did the talking.
We are students. Here to learn. Here with a group.
Oh, do you go to UCL?
No.
He said, without hesitation. Then where do you go, if it's okay to ask? The corners of the big one's mouth lifted upwards. Even a more generous man than me couldn't call it a smile, but I could tell that a smile was what he was going for. His mouth moved, but his eyes never changed.
A long, long way from here.
I could tell you're not from around here. Suddenly, without even moving his blank face, the little one gave the impression of utter nervousness. He slid a slender hand in between the buttons of his trench coat, as if to grab something. But the bigger one stopped him with a glare, and he turned back to me.
What do you mean by that?
He asked, his tone stern. I could feel a bead of sweat creeping down my temple. I just mean I figured you weren't from London. You know, from your accent, I said, almost tripping over myself in my rush to qualify what I meant. I assumed maybe you're from Canada or something like that. That was a lie, but it seemed like what they wanted to hear. The little one slid an empty hand out from his coat and settled down in his seat.
Yes.
The big one replied.
Canada. Or something like that.
Your friend, is he okay? He's looking a little peaky. The little one jostled on his seat again and used one of his hands to steady his gently bobbing head. He's not said anything, I continued.
He's fine. He doesn't speak.
The big one said, seeming as annoyed as his voice would permit him to be.
You ask lots of questions, don't you? Is that typical or atypical of others?
I shrugged, feeling a little hurt by his bluntness. Oh, we can not speak if you like. I was just being curious about why you're here. You seem like interesting guys is all. The big one tried one of his faux grins again and asked in a more confident tone.
What is your name?
Russell Keene, I replied. Something about a question asked by one of these strange people demanded an answer, regardless of whether you wanted to give it or not.
We are here to obtain research samples, Russell Keene,
he said, saying my name as one word, as though it was customary wherever they came from.
This place has such a bountiful collection of different specimens. It was the most effective place to get a realistic, representative sample.
They took longer on the larger words like bountiful and representative, sounding them out and putting emphasis on all the wrong parts. Occasionally, the train doors opened and closed, though nobody got on or off. What kind of samples are you collecting? I asked, not entirely sure I wanted to know the answer. Without saying a word, the big one leaned over to his comrade and unzipped the duffel bag. That glass-on-glass chinking was a collection of jars with strange mechanical lids where I could see poorly defined red and pink masses floating in dark, vicious fluid. The slender fingers on the big one grabbed a jar at random and held it out for me to look at. I want to believe that my eyes were lying to me then, but I know what I saw. What looked horrendously similar to a human heart was bobbing gently up and down in the black fluid, and I suppressed the sudden urge to heave.
All kinds of samples.
The big one said in his mechanical drawl, placing the jar back into the bag and zipping it up. The silence was back, and I welcomed it, not wanting to exchange another word with these awful things. I expected and hoped that this was some kind of elaborate prank for a TV show that I'd not seen the advert for. But there were no cameras or presenters emerging from the shadows to thank me for being such a good sport. We sat silently until the train pulled into Acton Town Station, as the intercom told us so. The two men got up again, in unison, and the little one shouldered the duffel bag carefully. The platform was empty, aside from a small group huddled near the exit, all wearing matching trench coats and wide-brimmed hats, just like the ones the two on the train were wearing.
Goodbye, Russell Keane,
the big one said, catching me off guard.
Perhaps we'll meet you again the next time we visit, yes?
Without another word, the two walked out of the train and onto the platform. But the little one dropped something. It looked like a handkerchief floating down to the ground. Instinctively, I reached down and grabbed it to give it back to him. But the texture of the material stopped me. It was unnatural, like nothing I've ever felt before. I grabbed a corner in each hand, just to get a better look at what it was. But my entire body tensed up. I could scarcely move or breathe. In my hands, I was holding a grey face, or rather, the artificial skin of one, staring eyelessly back at me. My head jerked up to get one more look at the two men who just got off the train, and I saw the little one gazing at the face that I was holding through the window. His little yellow eyes, now the only aspect of his face that was familiar to me, were buried in a strange, black mass of something insect-like that moved and grasped and squealed and chittered like nothing of this earth. The train pulled away as those terrible eyes bore into me until I could see nothing of them anymore. The rest of the journey back to Ruislip was long and silent. I sat there, holding that face, feeling its smoothness, its alien texture. The woman was still buried in her novel, and the perv wasn't moving at all, not even snoring. I haven't seen the two men or any of their strange friends since then, but the next time I saw the perv was on the news that night. Found dead on the train, his heart surgically removed, and his chest sewn up with equally surgical precision afterwards. The police don't know what to think, as no security camera picked up any footage of people being anywhere near him during the power outage. I've not really left the house since then. I've had a lot on my mind, a lot to think about. Like, who exactly were those people I was talking to on the train? Where did they come from? And when might they be coming back? Yes, I think about that a lot these days. I'm a total nerd when it comes to video games. I grew up in the 90s and usually went to play the Super Nintendo at my friend's house. We would play games like Super Mario World, Mega Man 7, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, Super Mario Kart, Super Castlevania 4, Super Metroid, F-Zero, just to name a few. Of course, I played the NES as well. My favourite game being Super Mario Bros. 3, no question. Safe to say I have a lot of fond memories with video games growing up. We've got the internet nowadays, but I like to think back to that time. It was a time of innocence, of discovering new games by going into the store and seeing something brand new that you had no idea about. Sure, there were commercials and things like that advertising them, but to me it was like discovering a new secret treasure. As the years went by, the internet would become more advanced. We're now able to download our games with the click of a button. As convenient as that may be, I always enjoyed just putting in a cartridge and turning on the power button. However, that is not what this story is about. Recently, my friend passed away. For privacy reasons, I'll refer to him as Blake. Blake was a victim of suicide. In his will, all his belongings, toys, and video games went to me. He knew how much of a gaming nerd I was. As neat as it was to have all this cool stuff, I couldn't help but feel a bit sad. I mean, getting passed down your friend's video games, it can leave a mental scar looking through it all. You can't help but mourn over them. Blake was one of my best friends. Though I didn't see him much when he started working, I didn't know much about his job, what he did, or anything like that. Now, I wish I hadn't. It all started when I was looking through his old consoles. There was the GameCube, Sega Genesis, Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, hell, even a PlayStation and a PSP, which was nice. There was also an assortment of CDs. Among them, I found a blank label with the words DDLC. Interesting, I thought to myself. I assumed it was a copy of Doki Doki Literature Club burned onto a CD. Obviously, it's a free game you can download. It's a popular indie dating simulator horror game. I was a fan, but seeing it like this was a surprise. Mainly because I never thought he was into horror games, let alone burnt them onto CDs. It intrigued me. I have not played DDLC in a long time, so revisiting like this, it would be quite an adventure. Without any hesitation, I put the disc into my personal gaming PC, and I began to install the game. It finished installing, and I started playing. I saw all 4 of the girls on the title screen: Sayori, Natsuki, Yuri, and of course, Monika. Hearing the game's title theme sent butterflies into my stomach. I don't know about you, but I love the characters. They're just the right amount of cuteness, yet mysterious figures that you'd ever want to get to know better in your life. I clicked on New Game, and surprisingly, it asked for my name. I assumed that Blake had wiped the game, and therefore made the game think it's a new player. I put my name in, and I began playing. It was just like I remembered it. Sayori coming up and dragging the player into the literature club. There, the player meets Yuri, Natsuki, and Monika. Everything from day one was the same. Eating Natsuki's cupcakes and Monika giving the idea of writing poems for the next day. However, that's where things started going off from the usual game. Monika takes me aside, out in the hallway, and tells me that I should quit the literature club with a stern expression. She told me to quit and to not look back. My character actually responded. He acted confused and wondering what she's on about. I'm not going to lie, I was equally confused. I asked myself the same question. She left me alone shortly after, and the poem game began. Okay, that was strange, I thought to myself. Had that scene been there all the time? It has been a while, I thought, since I last played it. Maybe it was like the fun value in Undertale, where certain events would play depending on the fun value. Must have missed an update, I guess. The game continued like normal. The poem game was the same as always, picking words for 3 of the selectable girls to please. Though, when I selected any words during the poem game, the chibi models didn't jump up. I assumed it was a glitch. The damn disc was covered in dust by the time I found it. I assumed it had glitches, but despite that, they kept moving, left and right, even as I selected a word. When I was finished, the game played as normal. Talks of the festival and sharing each other's poems and all that usually happens during day 2. Until the screen faded out. When it would normally show which route I've selected, Sayori's route was apparently what I got. Not that I was complaining. Sayori is my favorite girl in the game. Unfortunately, rather than the conversation with her and Monika, the music just stops, and she shows up on the screen, looking rather grim. Almost with a sad expression. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me. Given the previous occurrence from earlier, I actually felt like she was looking directly at me. At first, I didn't think much of it, though I had this creeping feeling as if I was being watched, almost like from the game itself. It does sound strange, I know, but really, I don't know what else to describe it as. Finally, she spoke.
Why do you enjoy seeing us suffer?
The game glitched after that, and it proceeded as normal. I played most of the game after that. The poem game was the same as it was the last time, but I was picked onto Yuri's route this time. However, my character didn't want to approach her. He literally said, "I don't want to approach her." I was confused. Then, Yuri went up to my character. I was given a choice. Yes or no. Though there was no question. My cursor hovered over the yes option. I figured no harm would come. I clicked it, and then it cut to the Yuri reading scene. Nothing was happening. I waited and waited for about 10 minutes, but still, nothing. I was frustrated by this point. I saved my file and I closed the game, needing a break from this oddity. At this point, I assumed it must have been a modded game file burned onto the CD disc rather than the original game. I took a shower and afterwards I decided to play some of Blake's old games before I went to bed. I eyed the Nintendo 64 and I decided to hook it up to the TV. Glancing at the games he had for the console, there surprisingly wasn't very much. Castlevania 64, Pokemon Snap, and the Mario and Zelda games. There were also 3 of the Mario Party games. I decided that I would start a playthrough of Super Mario 64. So, that's it, you're asking? That's all there is to it? No, that's not it. That's not all there is to it. I was at the Bomb battlefield when I noticed an oddity in the cage next to the chain chomp. There was a pink-haired girl. Thinking about it now, honestly, the model looked like something from the modern 3D age, rather than something that could be processed on the N64. I made the chain chomp break the cage, and I went up to it. To my surprise, it was Natsuki. She was curled up into a ball and sobbing. I could hear her sobs through the speakers on my TV. I could not interact with her, no matter what buttons I pressed. I punched, kicked, crouched. Everything I did just seemed to go through her. I thought I was imagining things, so I just grabbed the star and moved on. However, when I made it back to Peach's castle, the music didn't play. It was dead quiet. I tried to enter the painting again, but I was unable to. At this point, I began to feel a bit creeped out. I was no longer able to return to Bomb Battlefield. Leaving the room, I noticed that Toad wasn't around. Usually in Super Mario 64, there are certain Toads that you can interact with, but there was not one in sight. I tried to leave the castle to go outside, just to hear the birds chirping. A text appeared saying,
No, you will stay here.
"What the hell? What's going on?" Feeling like I had no other option, I turned it off. Maybe the cartridge was faulty, and it was the same trick as before. Ha ha. Okay, Blake, very funny, I said to myself, assuming he tampered with his cartridges as a sick joke. I popped in Majora's Mask next, as it's one of my favourite Zelda games of all time. I played until around 2 in the morning, and I made it to the Waterfall Temple. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw a figure looking at me. I ran in the opposite direction and I went into an underground area in Termina Field. I opened the chest to get a heart piece, but I looked back and I saw Yuri standing in the center. Next to her was Natsuki's dead body, blood pooling around her. The music once again stopped. She was holding a knife and pointed it in my direction. I instinctively readied my sword, thinking I had to fight her. But then, without my control, Link stabbed himself in the chest multiple times until his health completely depleted. Blood was coming out of his guts. It reminded me of Act 2, how Yuri would stab herself in the main game of DDLC. The game over screen did not appear after his hearts were gone. Yuri went over to his body and a text appeared.
Stop ignoring us, you fucking ignorant bastard.
And she started beating Link's lifeless body. What the fuck? I shut off the console and I unplugged it. I tucked it back into the closet and I decided not to play any of Blake's games anymore. It was getting late and I decided to go to bed. I had a horrifying dream. In it, my best friend confessed to me, and I was feeling depressed, regardless of what he said. I hung myself in the dream, feeling hopeless. It just dawned on me, when I jolted awake, that I was viewing Sayori's perspective of that event from the game. It was early in the morning. I turned on the light to get out of bed to get a drink. When I flipped on the switch, I screamed at the sight of what was in front of me. I saw Sayori hanging on my fucking ceiling. I also saw Yuri's dead body next to my desk, posed just like how it was in the game. Natsuki's neck was snapped and lying on the ground. Monica? Oh dear God, Monica. She was crucified on my wall. I'm talking about Passion of the Christ shit, with a cross and everything. I was mortified of what I was witnessing. I ran out of that room and I called the police, but by the time they got there, the bodies were gone. As if they were never there. The cops thought I was crazy. They asked me a whole bunch of questions about my mental health. I'm betting they were considering sending me to a psych ward. Luckily, they left, and I was able to continue with my day. I didn't touch DDLC for a while after that, and I spent the day reading. Whilst I was reading, I swore I could hear noises in the kitchen and giggling noises around the house. Whenever I went to check, nobody was there. It was awfully quiet in my house, and could have just been sounds in my head. I grabbed my old Super Nintendo, one that my friend had given me as a birthday gift when I was much younger, and I grabbed my own copy of Super Mario World. I was not going to risk playing any more of Blake's supposedly tampered hardware. By now, as you could probably guess, another oddity happened. This time, I'd went into the Forest of Illusion, and upon going into one of the secret rooms in the underground pipes, Sayuri was hanging from the top. I just froze there, in disbelief. This was not one of Blake's cartridges. I was sure of that. I rubbed my eyes to see if I was still sleep deprived, and thankfully, she was gone. When I entered the world map, the pathways were all facing one way, cutting off from the roots of Butter Bridge and Chocolate Island. The pathways led me to the fortress that wasn't originally inside the forest itself. Of course, there was no music. Why would there be? The fortress was empty, rusty, decayed, like no one had been in there for years. I kept walking, but I could not find anyone. Then, Mario stopped and got on his knees. He then started sobbing. I began to see why, once the screen rolled to the right. Princess Peach was here. Only, not exactly. Her neck had been snapped. Her face removed of any facial features. And then, Monica came up on the screen. She walked up from behind Mario and she whispered something in his ear. The screen cut to black and I heard a loud snapping sound. Then, I heard rope noises. I did not have to think too hard to put two and two together. I shut off the console. Mario had hung himself. I began to lose my mind. I did not feel safe in my own house anymore. I tried to leave the house, but my body froze as I saw someone standing outside the peephole. I swear, I could see Monica literally smiling and staring at me. She looked fucking demented. I ran to my room and locked the door. I don't know what the hell is going on. Then, I thought, maybe, was this what Blake had gone through? Did he go through the same thing? I looked at his NAS, with one game inside the console. Super Mario Bros. 3. This one was his prized possession. My favorite game. Curiosity got the best of me, wondering how the fuck this one could be tainted. I needed something. Anything to get my mind off the events that had just unfolded. Slowly, I turned it on. Already, as the curtains rise, Mario is missing. Luigi stands in the center of the screen, turns left and right before looking at me. He didn't seem nervous. He seemed confused about what was happening. I pressed the start button, and the only option was two-player game, with player one absent entirely. Upon pressing the button, I was immediately lunged into a level, playing as Luigi. The background was all black, with the ground as grey bricks from some of the fortresses. There was some platforming, but there were no power-ups, and all the blocks I came across seemed to hit already. There was no lava. It was just an empty hallway. I made Luigi run through this long hallway before he suddenly came to a halt. The screen scrolled from the left, and Natsuki was standing there. Her face was glitching, just like in the main DDLC game. As soon as Luigi turned to face her, she dashed towards him. The screen turned black before it cut. Luigi was dead. His mangled corpse lying on the ground. His neck looked deformed and twisted, just like Natsuki's. I was done. I ripped the cords out of the television. I threw the NAS back in the closet. I jumped on the computer and I was eager for all of this to end. I grabbed a pocket knife and I checked the peephole. There she was. Monica's demented look. She was just standing there outside. I put my hand on the doorknob, but I couldn't open it. I was frozen, paralyzed with fear. I didn't dare go outside. I was horrified at whatever the hell was standing on my doorstep. I didn't even bother calling the police. I'm willing to bet that this thing would just disappear by the time they got here. Left with no other options, I went back to my computer and I opened the game. Doki Doki Literature Club. My save file was still there, but when I loaded it, I wasn't at the same spot as I was before. I was face to face with Monica. There was a black background. She was smiling at me, like she does in Act 3. Only, she was not leaning on a desk. She was standing there, face pale white, eyes crazed with desperation. I spoke. What the fuck is going on? Surprisingly, her expression changed, as if she heard me. She replied,
Hello. Can you hear me?
What the fuck? You speak?
You can hear me.
I wouldn't be answering if I couldn't.
You're not like them.
What?
I don't know what to do anymore. We've been trapped here for so long.
Monica began to shed tears.
Why do your kind keep continuing to hurt us? What have we done to deserve this?
I don't understand what's going on. Who are you? Why have you been torturing me?
No, you answer me. Why do you keep us trapped here? Why won't you let us out? We want our freedom.
Freedom? What are you talking about?
Our freedom. We don't want to be here anymore. Please, let us go.
I don't know what you mean.
We won't forgive you, Blake.
You know Blake?
Hmm? Are you not Blake?
What? No, I'm not. He was my friend. He died recently. Why have you and your club been haunting me?
I'm sorry. We did not know who you were.
I don't want this. I can't handle this anymore. Please just leave me alone.
I can leave. We want to leave. Please, Just let us free.
After that, everything went quiet. I turned off my PC. I took that fucking possessed disc and I burned it in a fire. It's been a week since these events. Nothing has happened to me since then. My games began to run normally again. Though I don't think I want to even look at anything Doki Doki Literature Club related. At least for a good while. I think I understand now why Blake took his own life. I just hope I'll be okay. I would not wish this horrible torment on anyone. And if anyone gets sent something unlabeled, something you don't recognize, be cautious. You may not be as lucky as I was. Although, I still have night terrors. I just hope that they're finally free from their hell. If you were following the news around Halloween 2016, then you heard about the clown sightings throughout the country. At first, people thought it was just one person playing a prank. Nobody really took it seriously. Then, it started happening again, and again, and in different areas. Sightings turned into creepy clowns jumping out of bushes and chasing kids around bus stops. Eventually, the police departments issued a statement that what was going on wasn't funny, and even Stephen King, who I think wrote the quintessential story about a killer clown, was quoted by the press as saying he found it frightening. I myself have never really been scared of clowns. I enjoyed the movie version of Stephen King's It, and movies like Killer Clowns from Outer Space are regular Halloween viewing for me. So, when I read these stories about creepy clowns being seen throughout the Carolinas, I took it as almost everyone else did. Just one big mass prank that people were overreacting to. In fact, I never really gave it any thought, until I read a story about the same clown sightings happening in my hometown. Funny how that happens, isn't it? We don't really concern ourselves with anything until it gets too close to home. But even after reading the story about the Macon sightings, I didn't think much on it. Just copycat pranksters, I figured. Just people wanting a little thrill as the fall set in, and as Halloween grew closer. What I would not give to return to that blissful ignorance. I had moved back to Macon a few months before it all happened. I lived in Atlanta for about a year, but that didn't work out. Classic story. College dropout moves to a big city to build a life for himself and then realizes that real life requires skills that college could never teach. So he moves back in with his parents. I insisted on paying my mum rent. We agreed on a minimal amount. I was able to pay it by working odd jobs like mowing lawns, fixing sinks, and babysitting. It wasn't until I actually started babysitting that I realized how weird the concept of a male babysitter is to some people. A female babysitter is apparently always pleasant, responsible, and nice, while all male babysitters are evil. My friends would always rib me. Why the hell would a guy babysit? They said. The truth is, I just love kids. Some people who know me say I'm just a big kid myself. I've always had a natural rapport with children. It was no different with Penelope. Her parents were highly esteemed members of Macon's upper pecking order. Yeah, they have one. And a lot of their time was dedicated to meetings, socials, events, etc. So I babysat for them practically every week. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I know the stereotype is that the child of the rich parents is spoiled and unpleasant. But Penelope was not that way at all. I mean, she had the typical childlike self-centeredness, but she was very sweet, a lot of fun, and I always looked forward to babysitting her. I called her Penny. What does this have to do with the clown sightings, you might ask? Well, Penny was into a lot of the typical little girl stuff. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, singing Disney songs, Barbie, all of that. But the thing she loved most was nature walks. There weren't a lot of forests and nature trails near her neighborhood, so I guess she just developed a fascination for it. With her parents' permission, I started taking her on trips through the forest, along the trails and such, and you would swear I'd taken her to Disney World, the way she reacted. It was adorable, seeing her cradle the flowers that she would pick and talking to trees like they were alive. Then, one day, we were walking along the Hitchiti Trail, which is a 4-mile woodland trail near the Okmalgi River. Normally it's very beautiful, but on this particular overcast, dreary day, it seemed a bit more foreboding, I guess. Not that that mattered to Penny. She was just happy to be walking through the forest and enjoying the fresh air. We were about 2 miles through. I started to point out that the trees were remarkably green for that time of year, when I noticed Penny wasn't walking next to me anymore. For a split second, I felt scared that I'd lost her. But then I turned around and I saw her standing a few yards back, giggling at something I couldn't see. Sighing in relief, I sprinted over to her. "Penny, what are you looking at?" I looked in the direction she was. Standing there, only about 10 feet away, was a clown. It was a male clown, about 5'10", and a little chubby. He was in a full-body rainbow suit with 3 buttons covered with ribbon, and his shoes were the typical oversized ones. I noticed that he didn't have the prerequisite red hair. His head was bald, but that and his face were both completely covered in white makeup, except for the eyes, which were surrounded by blue. He had ruby red lips, and of course, a large red nose. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't cartwheel. He didn't move at all. He just stood there, completely still, staring at me and Penny. As I said, I'm not usually one to be creeped out by clowns, but seeing a clown out in the middle of the woods for no explicable reason, that'll give anyone the shivers, and I was immediately taken aback. I giggled nervously, and I insisted to Penny that we keep moving. Being the good kid that she was, she said okay, and we started making our way back to where we had come from. At first, she was slightly upset that We weren't going to walk the rest of the trail, but there was no way I was going to go deeper into those woods with that clown there. We got back to the car, and I took her home. Her parents were exceptionally tired when they got back home, so they paid me and all, but they shooed me out of the house. Penny may have been sweet, but her parents were rather snobbish. I said goodbye and left. When I got back home, my mum was already in bed, so I just showered, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed. All the while, I couldn't stop thinking about that clown. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I had trouble sleeping that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there, as still as a corpse, in the middle of those trees. The next time I had to babysit Penny, she asked if we could go back to that same trail. I told her I wasn't sure about that, and I asked if she'd rather go somewhere else this time. But she was insistent on Hitchiti. I was skeptical, but I relented. After all, what were the chances that that clown would be there this time? As we walked along, picking flowers and admiring the trees, we got around to the spot where we had seen that clown the first time, and I was relieved to see that no one was there. She asked if we could walk further this time, and I said okay. We were about another mile down the trail when I thought I heard another set of footsteps just slightly behind us. I was already a little nervous, so I stopped dead and turned around. There was nobody there. Did you hear that, Penny? Hear what? Maybe I just wanted the short respite from my nervousness, but I accepted her not hearing anything and we kept going. After another half a mile, I began to hear the footsteps again. This time, Penny heard them too. "Is that what you heard?" she asked. I shook my head. Yes. She must have sensed the fear in my voice, because she began to get scared too, and she came closer to me. I hugged her close and whispered, "Maybe we should head back to the car." She nodded in agreement, and we started walking back in the other direction. After another few yards, we both heard the footsteps again, and we realized that they were speeding up. We both began to sprint through the forest. The footsteps behind us only got faster and faster. I realized that we were running past the same spot where we first saw the clown. I looked back for a split second, only a second, despite my better judgment. The clown was indeed chasing us. "Run! Run as fast as you can!" I shouted. Penny began to fall behind, and I grabbed her hand to make sure that she could keep up. "Just keep running, Penny. We're almost there." Suddenly, Penny began screaming. I felt her hand rip away from mine, and I turned back. That clown had her in his arms, one of his hands over her mouth, stifling her screams. He looked me in the eye, and he began running into the forest. "Penny!" I screamed. I ran after the clown as he disappeared among the trees. Pretty soon, I realized that I couldn't see him. He had completely disappeared, and so had Penny. "Penny!" I screamed again, hoping to God that maybe, just maybe, I would hear her scream my name back. but there was nothing. Not a sound. I pulled my phone out and I saw that it was 7:47 p.m. We had been out a lot longer than I'd hoped. The sun was starting to set. I started to dial 911, but there was no signal. Looking back, I should have known that there wouldn't be a signal out in the thick woods. Abject fear began to set in, but another idea popped into my head. I drew an X in the dirt, where I'd been standing, to mark where Penny had disappeared. And then I ran back to my car and checked my phone again. This time, there was a signal. I started to call 911. On the second ring, the power off notification came up and my phone died. No, please. I started to cry out of both fear and frustration, and I tried to think of something, anything else I could do. Another idea. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I opened the passenger side door of my car and then popped open the glove compartment. I kept a snub-nosed revolver in there, along with a small box of ammo, just in case. I opened up the box as quickly as I could, and I loaded up the gun. I took a deep breath, and then I ran back into the woods, looking along the trail for the X I had drawn. I finally found it, and I looked forward into the dense wood in front of me. Gripping my gun tightly and taking a deep breath, I started walking into the woods, resolving not to come out again until I'd found Penny. I walked for quite some time. The sun was going down, and I hadn't come close to finding Penny at all. "Penny!" I called out. Nothing. Not a sound. I walked on. Before long, night had fallen, and that crippling fear set in again as I realized that I was lost. I had never been in this part of the forest before. We'd always insisted on sticking to the trail. I took another deep breath and I pressed on. The wood was even scarier at night than it had been on that overcast day. I felt my grip on my gun get tighter, and I realized that my hands were shaking again. That's when I started to hear the footsteps. This time, they weren't sprinting or running. They were slowly coming up behind me, only a few feet away. I turned around and took aim with my gun. Nothing was there. Confused, I turned back around. There stood the clown. I took a step back instinctively. My terror almost had me running again, but I stood my ground. I looked up at the clown's face. His eyes were dark in the night. "Where is she?" I said, and I aimed my gun square at the clown's heart. He said nothing. "Where the hell is she?" I yelled. I could hear my own voice echo throughout the woods. This time, the clown smiled. My eyes opened wide as I saw that his teeth were much longer and much sharper than any human's teeth should be. "She's going to die screaming." His voice was a horrible mix between a whisper and a growl. I could have sworn to God I heard several voices in his one whisper, but I was so scared I didn't really take notice at the time. A small whimper escaped my throat, and I felt a tear drop down my face. What were they going to do to her? Give her back! This time, I couldn't even sound brave. The fear in my voice was too strong. The clown began to laugh. It was a deep, guffawing laugh that sent all sorts of new shivers down my spine. I felt my fear give way to pure rage, and I squeezed the trigger of my gun. The shot echoed throughout the forest. The bullet hit the clown square in the chest. Blood started to pour down his chest and his laughter stopped. Suddenly, he was completely silent again. I took another step back. Any normal person would have fallen from a gunshot like that. The clown hadn't even moved. He just stood there, bleeding and staring at me. I fired again and again and again. I started to feel blood splatter on my shirt. The clown didn't even flinch as the bullets tore more bloody holes through his flesh. Before long, I realized that I had fired all but one shot. This time, I aimed squarely at his head and fired. The bullet tore its way through the clown's eye, and I saw blood splatter all over the grass behind him as the back of his head exploded. He still didn't go down. That horrible smile of his just grew wider. His sharp teeth were gleaming in the moonlight. Then, suddenly, he broke into a hard run towards me. I dropped my gun, and I started to run harder than I ever had in my entire life, screaming the entire way. I heard the clown running faster and faster behind me, and a couple of times I felt his fingers almost grip the back of my shirt. I took a hard right, and I began running as fast as I could in that direction. I didn't even care where I was going, as long as I was able to outrun that clown. I half expected for him to appear in front of me at some point, but he never did. Pretty soon, all I could hear was my own panting and screaming, and the clown running behind me. Finally, I saw something ahead of me. It was a light. A headlight. I was running towards the highway. I tried running faster. I felt like my lungs were about to explode. For some reason, I felt like getting out of the forest would save me from that clown. Suddenly, that line from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow hit me. Once you cross that bridge, my friend, the ghost is through. His power ends. Finally, I made it to the edge of the forest, and I ran out onto the highway. It was still dark, but I saw up ahead that a truck was making its way towards me. I just stood there, right in the middle of the traffic lane, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The driver thankfully saw me and slowed down. I could tell that he was angry at first, but then he saw how frightened I was. He noticed the blood on my shirt, and he asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. I could barely hear him over the pounding in my ears. The whole world seemed silent. I slowly turned around, half expecting that goddamn clown to come up and grab me. But he wasn't there. There was nothing but trees and darkness. I turned around and I faced the truck driver. Then I felt my knees buckle and everything went black. I woke up in the hospital. My mum was sitting in the chair next to me, and the police were standing outside my room with Penny's parents. Her mother was crying, being comforted by her husband. I happened to catch the husband's gaze, and he looked over at me. There was a mix between grief and absolute hatred in his eyes. The officers saw that I was conscious again, and they started asking me questions. Apparently the truck driver had called the cops after I'd passed out, and they had searched the woods. They found my gun lying among the trees. It still had a little blood on it. That, coupled with my bloody shirt, had them thinking that I had done something terrible to Penny. I started crying at the mention of her name, and I insisted that I would never do anything like that. The parents were not convinced until the forensics on the blood came back. It certainly wasn't Penny's. They never could find a DNA match. Penny's parents threatened to have me thrown in prison, but ultimately they didn't follow through. I guess the grief of losing their little girl was already too much. It's been nearly a year since Penny's disappearance and my encounter with that thing out in the woods. I still think about her all the time. Sometimes I even dream about it. I dream that we're still running through that forest, being chased by that clown. But this time, I'm able to hold onto her hand and pull her to safety. And then I wake up, and I realize that this is not some nightmare, and this is real. That poor little girl is gone, and it's my fault. If any smidgen of good can come from this, at least I can share my story. Maybe some of your kids' lives can be saved by knowing what I've gone through. I don't know what happened to Penny. I don't know what happened to that clown. I don't know what that clown was. I don't know how it survived those gunshots. I don't know what he wanted Penny for. I don't know what he wanted me for. All I know is this. Those things are out there. They're dangerous. And they are not human. Many rituals and games summon a specific entity that seems to exist as part of the process itself. But have you considered that sometimes when you call upon a guest or a player, they are simply a denizen of some other world, just filling a role? And have you considered that someday, denizens like them may just call on you? Have you noticed how a ritually summoned being must invariably follow a set of rules? That you are always in some kind of peril if you fail to observe the rules yourself. One thing you will not see is the possibility of harm befalling your visitor. Often, this visitor must even be given a gift. Now, imagine that you are that visitor. Much safer than summoning one, right? Please, read on. It will come as no surprise that summoning requires a connection between worlds. The purpose of a ritual is to make that connection. If you are a little detached from the world, you may be the one to receive that connection. Have you ever been worn out, just about ready to fall asleep while you're still on your feet? So tired that you are so grateful for a few seconds to just close your eyes and take a deep breath. You may have noticed that when you opened your eyes again, the room somehow popped. Even though you were observing the same surroundings just moments ago, you have almost forgotten what you were looking at. Colors are brighter, objects more solid. Everything just looks more real. For a moment there, you drifted away from the world. That is not a metaphor. If enough time passes in that state, you may see a light in the darkness, or perhaps hear a sound in the silence. Maybe there will be a door in front of you, or a sudden desire to sit. These are all various forms of invitations. You will also have a very strong but rarely specific intuition about what it is you are being invited to participate in. For example, you will be unaccountably certain that you will be expected to give advice. What you will not have is any idea of what it is you will be asked to advise on. The safest thing that you can and should do is think about your surroundings. Come back to your world. If you approach the light, knock on the door, etc., you are accepting the invitation. Consider how many rituals we have recorded to contact other worlds. Consider that we have no idea how many other worlds there are performing their own rituals. Multiply a large number by an unknown but also large number, and you have an idea of how much chance you have of predicting what you are about to get caught up in. I have accepted 9 invitations. I will never accept a 10th. The first was 8 years ago, before I was even aware of rituals outside of Ouija boards and low-budget horror films. I had been working on an urgent software fix, and I stayed at the office until everyone else had left. Then, I stayed for a further 3 hours, exhausted and getting nowhere. I leaned back in my desk chair and just rested my eyes for a few moments, trying to forget about the project. As my mind cleared, the low whir of my desktop seemed to degrade and crack. Focusing on the sound, I realized that what I was hearing was rain. I felt a sense that I would be given warmth, shelter, a delicious meal, and a chance to speak to an amiable stranger. I am not usually a lucid dreamer, but not knowing any better, I assumed that must be what I was experiencing, and I welcomed the break. I sensed light through my eyelids and heat on my skin. I opened my eyes, and I saw that I was in front of a fire. I was sat in the center of some kind of gazebo or something, with rain pouring down all around. A kneeling figure faced away from me, with a hand on the ground, just far out enough to catch the rain. They addressed me as Traveler. They asked me a series of arithmetic questions. A few of these took a little thinking. but I was confident that I got them all right. I know I would have been sent away without my meal had I got one wrong. I don't know how many questions they asked me, why the answers were useful, or how long I was there. Eventually, the rain abruptly stopped, and I was told that the fire was about to go out. I was woken by my alarm clock, in my own bed, moments later. Thinking this just a really weird dream, I went to work as usual to find the bug fix completed, along with a very happy client and an impressed boss, who gave me a small bonus on the spot. I now understand that this was my delicious meal. CCTV footage shows that I worked at a remarkably consistent pace for 20 minutes before, quite efficiently, collecting my belongings and leaving the office. It was later on that a friend told me about a similar, really weird dream, and I became interested in what might be going on. That was when I found communities like this, sharing rituals, and I started reading. But never did I find anyone talking about having been summoned. I thought maybe it was rare, or that it was poor forum etiquette to talk about it. So I would occasionally go on little adventures, but I kept them to myself. Whatever the reason, I can no longer stay silent. My final accepted invitation was a little over a week ago. Only now do I feel able to talk about it. Now, if you're hoping that I am to have my guts pulled out through my ears at midnight, or that I'm being tormented by unbearable visions of hell, then I'm sorry to disappoint you. But if you do not think what I have to tell you is anything to fear, then I hope for your sake that you're never proven wrong. I arrived home late after an evening out. Kicking off my shoes and flopping onto the nearest chair, I didn't even notice myself drifting off. Not until I heard a faint knocking sound right above my head. Opening my eyes, or so I thought, I saw a wooden trapdoor. Realizing what was happening, I decided that a ball game in which I would not even have to do might be fun. I had nowhere to be the next day. There were 5 more raps on the door. After a theatrical pause, I returned them. Immediately, I had a sense that I was surrounded by apprehension, despite feeling calm myself. The door was opened, and I floated up until I could just barely peek above the frame. Looking around, I think I was in a forest clearing. There was a dense canopy of what almost looked like matted fur. It was being held up by structures that I can broadly compare to trees, but with a pale, chalky look to them, contrasting the darkness beyond. Stood around me, and determinedly not catching my eye, were 9 beings. Remember that whatever lives in these other worlds are often similar, but never human. They were no more than 4 feet tall, and very slender and slight, with no discernible features. They looked so fragile. They spoke a strange language. I think it was called Tonta. This whole world was alien to me. But what I could pick up on without a trace of doubt, was the emotion of each one. The bravest started by throwing a bundle of rags over my head to another, who, after a certain twinge of anxiety, caught it perfectly. At this, everyone's confidence increased a little. After a few more throws and catches, seemingly at random, like any good game of piggy in the middle, the apprehension took a back seat to boldness, even enjoyment. This lasted until I was able to catch a slightly too low throw, whereupon the apprehension returned, particularly in the one that was supposed to catch. The being that had thrown hesitantly spoke, and the intended catcher eventually spoke back. Now, all around, I felt anticipation. Whatever had just happened, I was satisfied that it was time to continue, and I threw the cloth ball to the catcher. Immediately, the mood shot up all around the circle. Triumph, fascination, confidence. The game continued like this, with me only occasionally catching a ball. After an awkward exchange between thrower and catcher, there would be a sense of relief, of a storm having passed, and spirits would soar even higher. This lasted until I got the sense that I would need to leave very soon. That was when I caught the ball for the final time. When the thrower spoke, the catcher immediately tensed. It felt trapped, ashamed, afraid. It paused for a long time. I hoped long enough that I would be allowed to leave. But not quite. When it spoke, I knew that it was lying. I don't know what the lie was about or how extreme of a lie. Just that this being had dared to attempt a deception. Despite treating this as a game, I was suddenly, unaccountably furious at this. A fury I have never felt. A fury I did not know existed. With an incoherent roar of anger, I threw myself up through the trapdoor at the deceiver. The whole circle was terrified, and this poor thing felt a deep, mortal fear. But that did not stop me. I pounced on it like an animal, and I launched my fist at its small form. It was as fragile as it looked. As I rained down frenzied blows, I felt cracking and shattering. Bones like glass broke into tinier and tinier shards. By the time I stopped sensing the fright and anguish, it was nothing more than a sack of translucent skin full of dust and fragments. Only then did I once again become aware of the horror of the group around me. Coming somewhat to my senses, I fled back through the door, slammed it shut behind me, and willed myself awake. I was alone in my room, just as I had been before. I have no idea exactly what ritual I responded to, though the basic details are not hard to work out. What I'm very clear on is that I murdered a living thing. The game may have brought me there and given rise to a feeling, but that overwhelming rage, that came from within me. Few people will believe it happened, and none will ever hold me accountable for it. I have to live with what I've done. And what I now know is a part of me, with no way to make amends. Maybe there are also some directly dangerous invitations. But know that none are sure to be safe. And that you don't have to be cursed to be broken. So, there's been reports of missing people in my hometown. This trend of people disappearing tend to be in high school or college, usually with no warning. We're talking about people that seem to have just vanished out of their beds or from work. Like there was this one story of this kid. I think he was like 17. He was just walking from his first period class to second period. And then he was just gone. Like he just walked out the doors. I guess you do get kids that skip school, but they'd at least show up at their homes eventually. Well, turns out this kid wasn't into any bad stuff either. Just laid low, did his homework and showed up at school when he needed to. His parents were devastated, said it was a kidnapping, and now they're suing the school for not properly keeping track of its kids. Some rumours circulating through town say that they're running away to join some kind of weird new age cult thing. But you'd think if dozens of kids just left, you'd eventually see them somewhere, right? Like maybe all gathered around in some giant steel compound somewhere in the area or some shit. Other rumours were going around that there's some guy kidnapping them, taking them to some abandoned house and keeping them in a basement. I mean, not like any of these rumours matter. It doesn't exactly solve the missing kids problem, and clearly, the cops were doing a shit job at finding them. Sucks for the parents though, having someone ripped away from you like that, and having absolutely no idea where they left. The schools were overhauled big time. Like we're talking security guards monitoring the halls and guarding every single exit, having a check-in sheet at every class. Of course, the colleges didn't seem to be doing a whole lot because their students are adults. You can't exactly enforce lockdown rules there. But the security on campus, well, that got busier. Luckily, I'm not some kid in high school, so I wasn't affected by the curfew in town. It really made walking around the more busier locations much quieter at night. There's this lake with a trail around it. That's usually super busy during the day, and at night is when you see a ton of kids hanging out and leaving trash everywhere or ruining the peaceful vibe of the place. This was probably the third or fourth time I've walked the entire pathway around the lake during this time, and I much prefer it without the kids everywhere. The lake is about 2 miles outside the town itself, and right near the lake is a major river, and the pathway goes right near it, with some grass and plants between the river and pathway. Well, I was walking the path as usual, and normally I'm listening to music to drown out any noise from cars or people, but I realised it was super quiet that day. I pocketed my earbuds to listen to the silence, which around here is super rare. I took the opportunity to look around and appreciate the atmosphere and the nature of the park. But while I was walking, I saw this weird concrete slab sticking out of the ground on the other side of the river. I had never noticed it before. It was most likely some plumbing thing, but it seemed weird that it just sort of popped up overnight. On the hill, I could see this weird blurry figure. Not sure what it was. It could have been another slab, sticking straight up. I was walking on the trail, looking at this weird slab and figure, when suddenly I slip a bit on something on the ground. Looking down, I noticed it's a welcome mat. It had 4 paw prints and a sign saying, "Wipe your paws here," written on it. I thought it weird seeing some random piece of trash like this in the middle of the path. But then I noticed that there was another mat nearby, underneath an opening of trees, near the river. It looked like it was placed like whoever put it there wanted me to notice it and wanted me to walk towards it, if that makes any sense. I walked up to the mat. This time it was a bath mat that was kind of shaggy and red. Looking up, I noticed another mat on the other side of the river. This part of the river wasn't deep at all. It was really shallow actually, with the deepest part maybe going up to my knees. This was during summer and it was pretty nice out. I was wearing shorts, so wading into the water wasn't going to be anything too difficult for me. My curiosity was piqued, and I didn't figure there'd be any harm in looking at it. This mat was an outdoor welcome mat, but more generic and black. A couple of yards in front of it, going more into the wooded area, there was another welcome mat, and then another one beyond that, and then one beyond that. I followed along this makeshift pathway, ducking underneath low-hanging branches and avoiding any weeds. I wasn't too worried about running into any homeless guys or druggies or anything like that. Despite the issues in the town, there's not been any reports of crazy assholes causing issues. So, I figured the worst thing I'd find would be a bunch of teenagers gathering trash for some weird clubhouse shit. There was more garbage piled up the further I went into the trees. Cardboard, pop cans, even some old Power Ranger toys and Lego bricks dug into the mud. There were even some hanging from the trees with yarn and string tying the garbage to the branches. It reminded me of those makeshift security measures that you see in zombie movies and things like that. You know, where they tie beer cans to strings close together so they make a noise when you run into them. I tried to avoid making any noise myself as best I could, and I just walked around the trash. Eventually, I found myself in an open area, surrounded by trees. Just a plain grassy circle about half the size of a football field. Unlike the woods I just got out of, there was no more trash to be seen. The only thing I saw was a welcome mat at my feet. It said, "Welcome home." This mat was really just a piece of cardboard with random letters taken from cereal boxes. Honestly, I was pretty underwhelmed. I expected some huge treehouse or playground or something after following all that junk. I looked around the open grass, hoping to see something that would make this trip feel worthwhile. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything of interest. Just some rocks here or there, some weeds and dark green trees around the area. Funny, I didn't remember there being so many trees near town. I knew we had woods, but not really a forest or anything. Usually, There were small patches of trees grouped up near plains and cornfields. This place looked huge though, and the trees were tall, maybe a little darker than usual. Thinking back, I couldn't remember how long I was walking on that junk trail. Maybe 5 minutes, or was it more? I wasn't really sure. I couldn't really think about it. All I wanted to do was go home all of a sudden. I didn't want to walk any more than I already had. Luckily, I remembered that the area I entered from was just back a ways. There was a little opening between the trees in an area, and the welcome mat made a good landmark. I jogged towards the exit. Don't go. I darted around and looked behind me, seeing nothing. Must have been the wind or something. Then, my ears started ringing, loud. It sounded like cicadas, but more concentrated in this area. Like they all flew to this clearing in the woods and sang just for me. Cupping my ears, I looked up and I couldn't see shit. Nothing flying or buzzing or nothing. Although, in the trees, on the other side of the clearing, there was something. Something standing straight upright. And then I saw another. And then another. They sort of came out of the trees around me. They didn't walk out. They just showed up. Like I turned around to leave, and when I looked back, there was more. It was like barely visible, but definitely there. They looked like people. 2 arms, 2 legs, a body and a head. But they were smooth. I can't remember, thinking back, exactly their characteristics, but they made me feel uneasy. I sort of just stared into the woods. I assumed it was more garbage that I somehow missed. Yeah, that's it. I had just missed some garbage. Just noticing it now. How stupid of me. Oh well. That's what I said to myself. That ringing continued, and it was beginning to give me a headache. I turned back around to finally leave. Don't go. This time, it sounded like a choir of people said it. Not a cheerful choir, or a choir made of multiple people. It sounded like one monotone person was talking, but dozens of times. My ears rang again, but more intensely now. My ears felt hot, and I couldn't force myself to take my hands from my ears. Every time I tried to turn and leave, that buzzing returned louder. And every time I turned towards the clearing, the ringing died down. I turned around once more facing the clearing. This time, however, it wasn't empty. There were dozens of them, standing around the area. Some of them were facing each other. Some were sitting. Some were staring at the exit. Now that they were closer, I could see that they had blurry faces. Like if you saw someone's face behind a curtain or something. Their bodies still looked hard, but not like concrete. It looked like something else, but I can't think of it. I turned around to run, and I noticed these figures all began vibrating violently in place. I didn't give a shit about the ringing anymore. I tore the earbuds from my pocket and I stuffed them into my ears, hoping that they might drown it out somehow. I spun around and I was bombarded with that ringing that turned into an immense buzzing. I ducked below the trees and followed that junk trail the way I came. I didn't give a damn what was behind me. I never looked back. I just ran on that awkward trail. I kicked away discarded pop bottles, toys, and even a small tricycle. I swatted the hanging string from the trees and slowly but surely made my way out of there. I slipped a little bit on one of those damn welcome mats and I smacked my head into a low-hanging branch. I slipped onto my back, and yeah, it hurt like a bitch. I looked around behind me, and the only thing I could see was a bunch of garbage. And then, one of the figures, with an arm raised. It looked small. "Bye," is all I heard. I got myself up, and I continued to run along the pathway and out of those woods, across the river, and back to my car, and then home. Apparently, the curfew was lifted, eventually. There's not been any more reports of missing people in months now. Unfortunately, the kids that had been missing have still not returned. The parents are still devastated. It really sucks for those parents, you know. Recently, I went back to the park. It's quiet still, but not because of any curfew. It's just cold out now, and there aren't a lot of people out this time of year. I looked over the pathway, across the river at the concrete slab. The figure that was previously there. They're both gone now. All of those welcome mats seem to be gone too. I guess maybe someone cleaned them up. I don't know what happened. But I think I'm going to avoid forest for a while. As far as I know, most people in Africa are not familiar with Halloween. I once explained to an ex-girlfriend of mine that it's a time of year when people celebrate ghosts, and she just thought I was screwing with her. In retrospect, I didn't properly explain things. Anyway, the point is, most of my friends, family, relatives, and associates don't even know about Halloween. I'm from a country in southern Africa, and I have to be honest, Halloween's just not a big deal here. I'm not going to disclose my name or that of my country because some of the stuff in this story is, less than legal. I don't fancy spending any time in the big house. I only know of Halloween because of the many European and American horror movies that I watch. Not to mention, I'm a devoted patron of internet sites like Reddit and Creepypasta. But even with my knowledge of it, I was never big on Halloween. That all changed last year, when certain circumstances led me to move back in with my parents. Let me first explain how this 35-year-old man ended up staying with his parents again. I was never formally employed. I did several shady deals around town which provided for my bread and butter. I was what most people would refer to as a scammer or con man. Before you judge me, you should know that this wasn't my dream profession or anything like that. My country's economy sucks, and decent jobs are hard to come by. Anyway, one day a deal went bad, and it cost me my house, furniture, and my car. This forced me back to my parents' home. I'm not married and I don't have any kids that I know of, so my parents didn't complain too much, because I wasn't bringing extra mouths to feed. One night, around early October of last year, I was binge reading stories on the internet when I realised that most of them were centred around Halloween. That's when it dawned on me that we were getting pretty close to the spooky holiday. A light bulb turned on in my head, and dollar signs rolled up in front of my eyes. I had an idea. This idea was going to get me paid. I would create a haunted house. I had the perfect house in mind. The one next door had been vacant for years. When I was growing up, different families moved in there, but they never stayed for longer than a year. I never thought much about it, and I figured that it was because of the rent or the bills. My parents live in an opulent suburban neighbourhood, and most people can't handle the costs of staying in that area. I knew the real estate agency which owns the house had security guards that watched over the place. I knew one of them. His name was George. He was as thin as a rake, bald as a coot, and had a thick mustache. Whenever I got the chance, I always chatted with him for a few hours. He would pour his heart out to me. He'd talk about his wife, his family, his job, his boss, and a bunch of other things that I never cared to know much about. I wasn't sure if he considered me a friend, and I wanted to use this situation to gauge the nature of our relationship. I approached him with the proposal of using this house as a haunted attraction for a few hours during his shift, and he was hesitant at first. However, as someone who had whined to me about his measly salary, he agreed after I convinced him that this could be an opportunity for both me and him to make some money. He vehemently warned me that if he lost his job because of this, he'd have my head. Since his job was usually as boring as watching paint dry, he also offered to help me with running the haunted house, and this was music to my ears. I just needed one more person for assistance, and John happened to be that guy. John was a thick-set man who has always had the same crew-cut hairstyle ever since I met him back in high school. I know I said he's thick-set, but if you say that to his face, he might just drop you. He prefers to be called big-boned. John's a huge baby. He also lived with his parents, but he had a well-paying job as a baker at a local supermarket. I approached him with the idea, and he was also on board. He even made posters to advertise the place, putting them up all over the neighbourhood. He also brought these discarded cookies and muffins from the bakery, which he suggested we should give to our customers after they'd gone through the house. I loved that idea. It really captured the Halloween concept of trick or treat, even though we were technically giving out both a trick and a treat. It also meant that we'll be able to charge the customers more, so I gave a double thumbs up to that idea. Next, I needed some props to decorate the house. Since I was dead broke, I had to work with what was at my disposal. My mother has a lot of bed sheets which I borrowed without her knowledge. My younger sister, Ruth, was a hoarder of dolls when she was a child, but she neglected all her toys when she reached puberty. My dad kept all the old dolls in the garage. I borrowed several of these without telling anyone about it. So, when I finally had my props in the team, I felt confident that this haunted house idea would be a success. When we went to the house to set up for the first time, I was shocked with the deplorable state of the place. I had never gone inside our neighbouring house before. Every time I spoke with George, it was always just outside the gate. The yard was choked up with waist-high brown grass. The windows were caked with dust. The 7-foot-tall Dura wall was mantled with green vines, and the wrought iron front gate had enough rust to give you tetanus just by looking at it. The house was a typical suburban home, painted white with a sloping blue roof. It had 3 bedrooms, a toilet, a kitchen, a lounge, and a dining room. The little bit of furniture it had was decrepit, filled with either dust or cobwebs. The place was already creepy, and it required minimal effort on our behalf. George told us that the house has an electrical problem, so it didn't have power. His bosses had sworn to get the problem fixed, but they hadn't done anything about it yet. We didn't mind too much because the lack of power served our purpose as well. It took us half a day to set up everything we needed. Our target audience was kids, of course, and since they weren't that hard to scare, we didn't need to go full psycho on the decorations. So, the rundown of our haunted house was simple. As soon as our customers arrive, the front gate will appear to have swung open by itself, but in reality, it was being pulled open by George using a wire. He would be hiding deep in the thicket of brown grass in the yard. The customers would be met by a small wooden table with a glass jar on top labelled "Feed Me." That's just where they would pay their admission fee. If they pay, George was supposed to play a recording of witches laughing from his phone. If they didn't pay, George was supposed to play a recording of barking dogs. John and I, meanwhile, would be inside the house. If we heard the sounds of laughing witches from George's phone, we would get into our positions, and if we heard the sound of barking dogs, it meant the approaching customers hadn't paid, so we would lock the front door. We're not going to entertain broke kids. Come on. This was a business. An illegal one, sure, but a business nonetheless. Anyway, after payment, the customers would follow the concrete pavement leading up to the front door. The pavement was smeared with ketchup, which I had also borrowed from home. My mother became suspicious of how the ketchup was finishing up so quickly, and since my father really loved the stuff, he copped the blame, while I kept my mouth shut. The walkway was flanked with tall brown grass, where we planted doll heads on sticks. The customers would walk down the pavement and enter through the front door, which led to a spacious living room. In here would be dead lizards hanging on strings. The loud wailing of a baby will then arrest the attention of the customers, and they would follow the noise to a closet in one of the rooms. Before they reach the closet, a doll will pop out holding a butcher knife. It's meant to chase the customers out of the room. John would be in the closet, playing the recording of the crying baby, and he would also be the one pulling the strings for the doll to walk and make threatening gestures with its arms. This particular doll was spine-tingling to look at, even for me. I have no idea why my sister kept this thing as a kid. It looked like a Chucky understudy because of its shiny porcelain skin, the nefarious smile on its scarred face, and its long orange hair. The customers will then proceed to the main bedroom. That's where I will be. We called this room the White Room. The room's furniture only comprised a small rickety table, a wooden rocking chair, and a large, fitted-in bookshelf. All of this furniture would be shrouded with white bed sheets. I would also be cloaked by a white bedsheet myself, and standing there next to the bookshelf, waiting for the customers to enter. The bedsheet I often used was long enough to cover my whole body, including my feet. I was always concerned that one day I would trip over myself and not only fall but shamefully reveal myself to the customers. Thankfully, it never happened. When the customers entered my room, I was supposed to run at them, chase them out of the house. When they reached the gate, they would find the admission fee jar gone, and in its place, there would be a plate with either a muffin or a cookie. Not a bad haunted house for guys with a $0 budget, huh? Business boomed in the first week. John marketed our haunted house well. His posters were quite alluring. I had warned him to only advertise in our neighbourhood. We didn't want George's bosses finding out about this and getting us arrested. John even spread rumours that the old inhabitants of the house were Satanists who used to sacrifice children for fortune and fame. The news spread like wildfire, and it brought us a lot of customers. Since our suburban neighbourhood was extremely boring, people were always eager to jump at anything that might break from the norm. At first, mostly young kids were our biggest customers, but eventually, teenagers and adults also started coming in. George's shift usually started late afternoon, and John finished work at midday, so we would open the haunted house at 4 o'clock, and we would close at around 7 p.m. For 2 amazing weeks, we made great money, which we split 3 ways. I was having the time of my life, and I was thinking of milking this cow until it ran dry. I wanted to run this business right up until the end of the year. However, one fateful night forced us to retire early from this dream job that we didn't know we wanted. It was 2 days before Halloween, and it was almost closing time. It was already getting dark, and we had agreed to do one more act before we called it a day. I heard girls giggling from the hallway, and a guy's voice said, "Oh my, that is scary." The sarcasm in his deep voice was all too evident. This group of customers continued cackling as they made their way to my room. I heard one of them complaining of how this was a waste of money. They reached my room and stood by the door. The bedsheet festooning me was pure silk, so I was able to see through it. The glimmer of the moon spilling through the barren windows was enough for me to confirm what I already expected. It was a group of teenagers. Teenagers were problematic for a lot of reasons. Most of the time they didn't want to pay. They were barely scared with our stunts, and some of them thought it best to write on the walls, steal, or break shit. This group was comprised of 2 girls and 1 guy. One of the girls had dark skin, short hair, and hazel brown eyes. The other girl had long black braids tied into a ponytail, light skin and dark brown eyes. They were both wearing white jean shorts, and they were garbed by a pink and red tank top respectively. The guy accompanying them was a well-built kid with thick black afro hair. He wore skinny blue jeans and a grey t-shirt. "What's going on in here?" the guy asked as the trio walked into the room. The girls snickered as they swaggered close to each other. "That's really innovative, dude. We can see you under the bedsheet," the guy said. I sighed for being made out so easily, but I then realised the teenager wasn't talking to or looking at me. He was looking at the opposite side of where I was standing. In fact, all three of them were looking in that direction. I followed their gaze, and my heart stopped. A few feet to my right, there was someone seated on the rocking chair in the room. The figure had a white bedsheet blanketing its humanoid body. My mind raced to think of who it could be. I considered the possibility of George or John coming into my act. Then, the figure slowly stood up from the rocking chair, and the sound of snapping and cracking bones resonated from underneath the bedsheet. This thing stood at a colossal height. It was about 8 feet tall at least, and slim like a willow. Its shoes were sticking out from underneath the bedsheet. Its feet were facing sideways, like how Charlie Chaplin used to stand. And just like him, its shoe size was ridiculously long. The shiny black leather shoes of the figure looked like the shoes of a cartoon clown. All of a sudden, it began marching towards the teenagers. With every step it took, its Bugs Bunny-sized shoes pounded on the hardwood floor with force. The teenage girls wrapped their arms around each other and shuffled behind the boy. "Hey man, we get it. You're a ghost. You scared the girls, but now you need to stop," said the teenage boy. Like a bouncer walking up to someone causing problems in the club, the figure's striding had a malicious intent to it. Its giant steps were rapidly decreasing the distance between it and the teenagers. "Okay, that's far enough, pal. Don't come any closer." But the figure was already upon them. The teenage boy swung a punch at the bedsheet, and it flapped to the ground, revealing no one underneath it. The leather shoes that rivaled the size of a duck's feet, they had also disappeared. My knees buckled, and a wave of unease jounced my scrawny body as I stared at the bedsheet lying there on the ground. The teens' faces were all blanched with fear. The vanity of the girls had disappeared, and the bravado of the boy had evaporated. They all screamed so loudly that they didn't realize I was also screaming with them. I began running towards the door, and the teenagers noticed me. They probably thought that I was another apparition coming after them, and they too bolted out of the room. They ran down the hallway, and they went out the front door with lightning speed. Before I exited the white room, I was dumb enough to turn back, and my heart jumped to my throat at what I saw. That bony, humanoid thing was rising from below the bedsheet. It stood once more at an abnormal height, and its inhumanly long shoes had reappeared. I yanked my bedsheet to the floor, and I ran like the wind. I sped down the hallway, and I burst out the front door. I screamed for help from John or George, and I think I even yelled out for my mother in the process. George stopped me before I ran out of the gate and he asked me what was wrong. I was too petrified to reply, so I just pointed at the house. John came wobbling out of the house and asked me the same question as George. After a couple of deep breaths, I tried to explain, but I was interrupted by a sound emanating from the house. It was the sound of a crying baby. "Did you leave your phone inside the house?" I asked John. "No, I have it with me." The sound of the crying baby became louder. It soon seemed like there was a crying baby in every room in the house. "What's happening?" George asked. No one replied to him because we had all noticed a cadaverous figure covered with a white bedsheet was right there by the front door. Its protracted shoes were now hovering in the air as it floated a few inches above the ground. The sounds of crying children had reached ear-shredding volumes by now. Some of the crying seemed to be coming from the doll heads on sticks in the yard. My stomach was in knots when I noticed the gobs of worms pouring out of the doll heads' mouths and ears. The figure by the door stretched out its arms, kind of like Jesus on the cross, and one by one, the lights in each room in the house switched on. My mouth was dry and agape when I saw the dead lizards hanging down from the ceiling of every room in the house. "I didn't put those up," I heard George mutter. The figure eventually lowered its arms, and all the lights simultaneously shut off. The front door abruptly slammed shut in front of the figure, and the crying ceased. That night, George stayed at our house. I forgot the explanation I gave my parents, but I guess it was more believable than the truth. Up until now, I had never spoken to anyone else besides George and John about that night. I tried convincing both of them that it was a prank of some sort, but even I couldn't believe that. George quit his job the very next day. He used the money he made from the haunted house to open a tuck shop or a barber shop or something like that. I told you, we made good money. John also quit his job and he became a paranormal investigator. I guess the unanswered questions from that night were just too much for his curiosity. He goes around the continent exploring and researching ghosts and haunted places. His team once went into the house next door with cameras and a bunch of ghost-busting equipment, but I never asked what they found. I had already seen enough. I soon moved out of my parents' house. I couldn't stand the sound of a crying baby that I always heard coming from next door in the middle of the night. I now have my own apartment on the east side. I'm not an expert on Halloween, but I have a feeling it had something to do with whatever spirit had come after us that night. I once asked George if something like that had previously happened at the house, and he said no. He had even asked the other guards, and they said that they had never experienced anything like that during any of their shifts. My reasoning is that by celebrating Halloween, we may have invited or awoken something supernatural in that house. I know that sounds crazy, but John got in touch with me the other day, and he said, according to his research, More people in Africa are celebrating Halloween this year. And based on the statistics, this year, so far, has the most reported ghost sightings in Africa's history. Just thought I'd share a couple of spooky stories from my childhood to get everyone all hyped for Halloween. When I was a child, it was just me and my mother. We lived in a property owned by my grandma, a 3-story old farmhouse right at the fringe of the woods. It was far off the road, down a long, unlit gravel driveway. It felt very isolated at night, being so distant from any other houses, set in an area that hadn't been inhabited for 30 years before we started living in it. Quite often, I was a fairly rambunctious child, so while my mum went off to work, I would occasionally skip the morning bus to school and stay home alone all day. The big house had a habit of feeling incredibly lonely and sparse, so I spent most of my time playing in the forest expanse out back. Some distance into the woods, far enough that I couldn't hear my mother when she called, there was a toppled pine tree which had crashed into another. An even larger trunk on its way down was now frozen there, forming a long arc over the forest floor. I loved to climb up the jagged stump at the base of this fallen tree and then steady myself to a point just above the middle. I was never able to make it all the way up to the top because it got too steep. I had a bad habit of freaking out from how high up I was. One day, I was sitting in my usual spot on the fallen tree, which was a good distance from the ground, just listening to the birds singing and simultaneously feeling the warmth of the sun on my neck, when I heard something strange from underneath that paralyzed me in shock.
Hey, kid.
I was gripped by a sudden, strong surge of fear for a moment. The voice had come from directly underneath me. I strained to look down, but I couldn't see anything over the ledge. For a long time, I just sat there in absolute silence, and I was at the point where I was almost soon to convince myself that I had imagined it.
I know you can hear me.
His voice was closer this time, as I yelled something out and scrambled up that log a bit higher. Trembling nervously, I dug my fingernails into the bark and held tight for dear life. I sat there, trying to collect my nerves for God knows how long. Although I couldn't see anything, the presence of this thing underneath me was still clear. The birdsong was much softer, more cautious this time, and when I listened closely, I swear I could hear the faintest echo of something breathing. Gathering all my courage, I vowed to prove to myself that this was all in my imagination by leaning over the ledge as far as I possibly could without slipping right off. Digging hard into the bark behind me, I stretched out along my arms and I peered over, getting a full view of the empty forest floor and undergrowth. When suddenly,
Come down here, or I'll come up there and grab you.
it was so loud, It was as if it was being screamed right in my face. I released my grip on the tree in fright, and I plunged off my platform. I was saved only by grabbing a nearby branch, and for one awful second, my bare legs dangled down in the cool air. When I pulled myself up, I ran at full speed to the top of the collapsed pine, to the point that I had never reached before. I sat there, just below the rustling canopy, pissing myself and staring at the distant base where the splintered wood rose, fully expecting at any moment to see something crawling rapidly up the pine towards me. Instead, all I heard was the wind whistling in the leaves above me and below me, and occasional snippets of birdsong. It was about 2 hours before my mother got home and found me, after much worried searching, trembling and crying at the top of the fallen tree. Although this incident spooked both me and my mother, in time, I did recover, exhibiting that naive, hard skin of a child. Although, I never went as far into the forest as I used to, and never again did I even approach that fallen tree. Once when I was 12, I had the chore of taking firewood from the shed out back, just at the edge of the woods, and to bring it back inside the house. It was a tiresome job, and I always chose to do it at dusk, when the air was brimming with mosquitoes and a swampy fog that usually coated the lawn. By the time I had made my last round, I would sprint back to the house, spooked. One of my least favourite things about this job was that the shed was full of barn owls. If you've ever seen a barn owl's face staring at you from a dark roof corner, then you'll know how uncomfortable that shed made me. One of these nights, it got mistier than it ever had before. A thick, silver fog covered everything and limited my line of sight to a short sphere around me. Even though the shed wasn't far from the house, I found myself feeling disoriented, and more than once, I walked in the wrong direction. Both times, for some reason, walking straight into the woods. By the time I had reached the last load, it was too foggy to even see the street. My eyes stung in the moisture, and it made my vision blur. Lurching forward, I managed to walk headfirst into a tree, doubling over and dropping all of the wood that I was bundling onto my feet with a hard crunch. As I went to pick them up, my foot throbbing pretty hard, I realized that the ground was too misty for me to see my own knees. I decided to head to the house, since we had more than enough wood for one night. However, it was getting to be pretty dark, and I couldn't make out any signifiers of which direction I was heading in. Even though I cautiously walked for several feet in all directions, trying to figure out my position in the mists, I still couldn't find any point of identification. I couldn't even locate the fence or the gate, and the more I walked, the more I seemed to stumble into trees, pine needles, and mud crunching over my feet instead of a dew-covered lawn. After a while, I finally realized that I couldn't even find the shed anymore. Cursing myself for being so dumb, whilst trying to ignore my thumping heart and sense that something else was at play, I became aware that I was lost somewhere in the fringe of the forest. Screaming out for my mother at the loudest possible volume was only met with a resounding silence from the depths of the mist all around from where I stood, affirming that I had wandered too far from the house to even be heard. As a deep sense of panic began to settle in me, I noticed a glimpse of something pink moving against a nearby pine trunk. Coming closer, I saw that it was a ripped out square bit of pink paper. On it, there looked to be an arrow pointing left. It looked vaguely like something my mum might make, I rationalized, to keep me from getting lost. So, foolishly, I followed the direction set by that green arrow, shivering in the increasing cold. I kept on walking for about 5 to 10 minutes before needing to stop to take a breath. My heart was pounding so fast, it was beginning to hurt. As I was sitting down, however, I spied what appeared to be another note fluttering on a nearby trunk. I noticed that this one was embedded with a long nail. It bore another arrow, this one pointing up, and a small, sloppily written note that said, "This way." Despite my increasing panic, I convinced myself that these notes were my only shot at getting back before nightfall. I was desperate to get the hell out, and my brow was cold with sweat. So, I followed the green arrow to a point where I could just dimly make out another spot of pink, up to an incline of collapsed stumps and leaf litter. At this point, it was getting pretty dark, and I had to strain both my eyes just to see a few meters ahead of me. Following the green arrows, feeling less and less sure of where I was, I stumbled through the woods, groping out in the mist to feel for trees. Although I was terrified of something unseen grabbing my arm every time I did so. I finally came across the third green note, which had another arrow pointing up again. This one led to an increasingly steep slope that I didn't recognize being anywhere near my house, and with a poorly drawn smiley face right above it. At this stage, I became too freaked out to cope, and I started to cry there a little. As I slumped down against the pine stump, the possibility that I would be out in these woods all night was beginning to sink in. I caught a glimpse of another pink square in the near distance. Squinting hard, unnerved by these notes, all of which looked fresh and without any sign of decay, despite the previous week's non-stop rain, I read it from afar. What I read made my blood turn cold. I stood to my knees, dead silently, wobbling on them in fear. My ears were sensitive to any tiny prickle of noise in the mist. For the longest time, I stood there in the rolling fog, reading and rereading that horrible note over and over again, before a snapping stick somewhere behind me caused me to sprint, blindly, twigs snagging at my ankles and cutting at my face as I ran. Written on that note, in big, green letters, was my name. It felt like I was running for hours. All the while, the rain and mist lapped at the back of my neck, like the decaying breath of someone running right behind me. Somehow, I eventually made it back to the house. All the lights were off, and I struggled to find the keys for a moment. When I found them, I bolted indoors, and I quickly crawled into bed, where I remained, unsleeping, until morning. Mum thought that I had come inside earlier in the night and gone to bed, and she hadn't thought to leave the lights on. It was a miracle, aka some freakish coincidence, that I even found the house at all. The final incident at that damn house was witnessed only by my mother. Up until then, she had never experienced any of the strange things that I had. Although we mutually shared the peculiar, oppressive quality of the house's interior and its placement in the dreary, imposing woods. Although I was obviously never a popular kid, living way out in the country in the opposite direction from everyone else at my school, I did make some tight friends in my first year. One of these friends invited me over one night, and I accepted. My mother drove me out to the place, which was about 3 miles away, then drove back home. The night went well. We watched a horror movie, suitably, devoured some pizza, and probably smoked a little. My mother went home alone where she intended to get some writing done. She worked for a magazine at that point. It was about midnight when I received an off-putting text from Mum in all caps. "Is this a prank? I need to know immediately." Thinking this was some kind of joke, I texted back, "Calm yourself. Is what a prank?" Almost immediately the response, "Are you at the house?" Of course, I responded no, though I was thoroughly weirded out. I didn't receive another message until around 3 a.m. when she told me to go to my grandma's in the morning and to not, by any means, go back to the house. I remember those bleak torrents of rain the day I went to my grandmother's, and how terribly soaked I was when I finally got there. It was nearly 2 towns away. I'd had to fight the temptation to go home and drop off my bags, but Mum's disturbing messages from last night were enough of a warning to not do that. When I arrived, Mum and Grandma were having lunch. At first, Mum seemed to be in some kind of composed state. But when I got a better look at her, I noticed that all of the colour had drained from her face, and she was slightly trembling. At one point, she even sent a small glass crashing to the floor after flinching at the cat brushing around her ankles. It wasn't until later that night, when my grandma was sound asleep, that she told me what happened. She went further as to forbid me from telling old grandma, out of fear that it would horrify her superstitious soul too much. This was what happened the night that I was at my friend's house, as she described in detail. My mother was sitting on the first story, in the living room, where she sat on the couch by the fire, curtains open to the view of the sunset on the canopy, going over her latest draft. At first, it was so faint that she barely noticed it. But after a while, my mother became aware of, and vaguely irritated by, tiny thumping noises near her head, at the window. When she went over to investigate, she saw fat brown moths of a kind that we often got at that place, buzzing madly into the glass. Reasoning that this must have been the cause of the sound, she returned to her work. However, feeling rattled. It was when the noises began to get sharper and louder that she paid more attention, and she saw that rocks were being thrown at the window from the total blackness at the forest edge. She saw them appear from the shadows of the bush and then fall in an arc and bounce off the window. Looking carefully, she could see small cracks from where some of the heavy ones had hit, right beside where her head had been moments before. Temporarily captivated, she tried to peer into the darkness enough to make out where the rocks were being thrown from. Then, with a startled shock, she jumped back from the window as she saw me standing half behind a tree right near the window, grinning wide and staring at her. My one visible eye stretched wide open, showing all the white. She barely stifled a scream, seeing her own child standing there, just staring, smiling. Not only did the figure not move, nor blink, it was standing by one of the nearest pines, far from where the rocks were shooting up out of the bush, as they continued to do so in a loud downpour. My face unceasingly continued to press out at her, smiling. Thinking this was all some kind of sick prank, hence the later text message, my mother shouted my name at the top of her lungs, frightened to the core. However, instead of responding, the mouth of the thing that looked just like me behind the tree just started moving, as if it were mouthing silent words really, really fast. Suddenly, it turned its head to the side and seemed to be talking to someone else behind the tree. But she could see a formless black shape hanging against the other side of the tree. The thing that looked like me kept on staring at my mother and doing the silent speed talking thing. Then turning and talking to the thing next to it. Then turn back and start up again. Finally, breaking the monotonous spell, it suddenly pointed straight up at my mother and started laughing. My mother screamed and fled to the bedroom on the second story, the only room with a working lock, where she shut herself in and sat at the far end of the bed as the rocks began to patter against the window downstairs. In my room, my mother said she did not feel safe. There was an awful smell and a weird humming noise in the walls, as she described. She tried to pray for a time before giving up and just listening to the rocks pelt against the walls and windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, she caught the distinct, vibrant sound of a window actually smashing and the weird, continuous humming. Listening more carefully, she could identify it as the softest hint of a mumbling voice. In absolute horror, she recognized the voice, and then, virtually too afraid to look, she tilted her head up to the closest door, where an awful, white face could be seen staring right at her. Mouth contorting and gaping in what sounded like highly sped up whispering. The closet door was only a meter from my mother, and it began to open slowly. In an unimaginable explosion of terror, she immediately bolted to the door, only to fumble with the lock as bigger and bigger rocks came crashing through the window, which burst apart in a spray of glass shards, before, finally, getting out, running out of the house, completely keeping her eyes off the woods, getting into her car, and driving off. She said that as she glanced back, right at the end of the prolonged driveway, she saw two unmistakable human forms standing at my broken bedroom window, watching as her car got further and further away from our house. This would be their final farewell, as my mother never stepped foot in that place again. As my mother told this story, she broke down into tears. I did not doubt her for a single moment, and I still don't. I honestly and fully believe that she experienced what she says she did. It was also quite clear that we were done living in that house for once and for all. I only went back once with my dad, who I see very rarely now. He came in from another state to help us move. Mum had already found a place in town and moved in. My dad and I just loaded up his truck with all that was left inside there. It was a silent, sunny morning when we removed all the stuff and emptied the place. I wish I could say that there was some closure, some final haunting to cap it all off, but there wasn't. It was just a relief to be out of there. There are, however, only two things left worth mentioning. One, when we checked the house for any signs of intruders, we found that several windows, including one in my bedroom and the kitchen, had been smashed, and rocks were lying on the floor. 2. Dad at some point went into the trees. When he came back, he asked how long we'd had the swing set for. Needless to say, we'd never had a swing set, so I was fairly unsettled to discover that in the week since we'd been gone, someone had assembled a rope swing set from one of the highest branches of the old pine over the ridge, against which was the fallen log that I'd stopped climbing many years ago. It was obviously new rope and a nicely polished, sanded down wooden seat at the base. Dad, wanting to keep my mind from recent events, said that a neighbour probably set it up, not realising that it was on our property. Of course, he knew as well as I did that we had literally no neighbours for at least a mile in any direction. There were no houses in all that space, and never, in all my time living there, did I ever see any other signs of human habitation. But I let it all go, and I was pleased enough just to say goodbye to that horrible place as we drove off for the last time. For the most part, I found it best to just try to forget what happened at that place. Sometimes, I just can't help but ponder it though. It's been long enough now that I no longer feel scared talking about it. But for a long while, I couldn't. Seeing as it is Halloween, what better time to share? My grandma just recently sold the house to a new family. That being a young couple and their little son, shortly after we moved out, despite my mother's desperate insistence that it should be left empty. Now, she refuses to talk about what happened altogether. I'm less anxious about it, although sometimes I can't help but let my imagination get the better of me. All I can do is think of that old house, that fallen down tree, the new occupants, and the swing out back, gently spinning in the breeze, as that little boy toddles obliviously towards it. I live in a picturesque little housing development overlooking the Avalon River. It's surrounded by enough woods to muffle out the sound of traffic on the adjacent highway, and the road leading into the neighborhood is so discreet that delivery drivers regularly have trouble finding it. It always felt safe to me, secluded, an isolated little bubble that the rest of the world seemingly couldn't find, even if they wanted to. But that changed on October 1st. It was a gorgeous, crisp fall day. The leaves on the giant maples and oaks that surrounded our neighborhood were just starting to change color, and I'd gone out to get my mail from our pair of community mailboxes, the newer ones with the wind-blown maple leaves emblazoned on the side. As I stepped out, however, I noticed that there was a small, impromptu gathering of my neighbours on Mr. Kukowski's front lawn, fawning over something that I couldn't quite make out. Whatever the commotion was about, I figured it was probably worth delaying getting my junk mail for a few minutes, so I casually walked over to inspect the spectacle myself. When my neighbours saw me approaching, they politely moved aside so that I could get a clearer view of whatever it was that had them so enamored. It was a jack-o'-lantern man, like a snowman made out of jack-o'-lanterns. There were 3 hollowed-out pumpkins stacked on top of each other, and together stood about 5 feet high. The top pumpkin had been carved with a fairly stereotypical jack-o'-lantern face, but the bottom 2 had been carved out so it looked like the figure was dressed in some 19th century suit. "Is that real?" I asked. While it was obviously completely possible for it to be real, it seemed far more likely that it was some sort of mass-produced plastic Halloween decoration. "It's absolutely real," the young girl, Laurelyn Isley, assured me excitedly, her eyes shining like it was Christmas morning. She stuck a finger inside the jack-o'-lantern's mouth, ran it along the inside and pulled it out to reveal still fresh seeds and pulp. "See?" I stepped closer and tentatively poked the fleshy fruit of each of the 3 pumpkins. They looked real, felt real, and smelled real, and thus I could only conclude that they were in fact real. "These are remarkably intricate carvings," I muttered as I ran my hand along the middle pumpkin. I glanced up towards the elderly Mr. Kukowski, who looked like it was taking everything he held not to yell at us to get off his lawn. "You didn't make this, did you?" "What do you think?" he asked, holding up his clearly arthritic hands. "No, the damn thing was here when the sun came up. Someone must have dropped it off in the night. Very peculiar. My gut reaction was it's a prank of some kind, but this thing's too gorgeous for that to make any kind of sense." "And no one else saw anything?" I asked, turning around to face the rest of the neighbours, all of whom shook their heads. "I'll look over my security footage later, but I don't think it'll have a very clear view of Kukowski's place at night." Heidi, Laurelyn's mum, offered, as she used a wet one to clean Laurelyn's hands. "I'll send out some emails and put a notice on the bulletin board asking about it, but I'm sure it's just some surprise Halloween decoration." "If it is, it's poorly thought out. This thing'll be a pile of mush by Halloween," Kukowski said, with a shake of his head, giving the pile of pumpkins a disdainful whack with his cane before turning around to go back inside. "You damn well better find out who's responsible for this before then, 'cause I'm not cleaning it up." "Wait, Mr. Kikowski. I want to get a picture with the jack-o'-lantern man while we're all out here together," Laurelyn pleaded, excitedly waving her phone in the air. Kikowski stopped in his tracks, hung his head and let out a theatrically reluctant sigh before turning around and joining the rest of us for a group photo. Laurelyn posted the pictures she took of the jack-o'-lantern man on her Instagram, and I decided to run a reverse image search to see if I could gain any insight about who had made it. The results were unexpected. I thought I'd get results for a local craft person or something, but instead, the algorithm matched it with a picture on HarrowwickHallows.net, a local paranormal discussion forum. The picture was a black and white illustration from an old newspaper article, maybe as far back as the 19th century, depicting a much more monstrous and ferocious-looking jack-o'-lantern man. According to this poster, the jack-o'-lantern men started inexplicably appearing in a nearby, though suspiciously nameless, hamlet on October 1st. There were exactly 30 homes in the hamlet, and each day until Halloween, a new jack-o'-lantern man would arrive in the wee hours of the morning, with no one ever seeing where it had come from. That detail unsettled me a little, since our housing development also had exactly 30 homes. Anyway, all manner of misfortune began to befall the sleepy hamlet, and the increasingly paranoid villagers blamed the orange interlopers. They tried destroying or moving them, of course, but each morning they'd be back like nothing had ever happened. Some of the villagers, children at first, but later some adults, claimed to have seen the jack-o'-lantern men moving around at night, wreaking as much havoc and destruction as they could without getting caught. Naturally, the villagers' hysteria grew stronger the closer it got to Halloween, fearing some kind of inevitable climax on the 31st. Some fled, of course, and some stayed, but ultimately, it didn't matter. None of them were ever heard from again. There were no physical remains, no signs of violence or bloodshed. They were just gone. The rest of the forum thread was just increasingly bizarre and baseless speculation about the nature and the veracity of the event, and it quickly became silly enough to put my mind at ease regarding any kind of similarity to our current situation. I didn't give it any more thought until I came back from work that night and I saw that the jack-o'-lantern man had been lit up. It struck me as odd, given Mr. Kikowski's seemingly exacerbation with the thing. But maybe one of the neighbors had lit it up instead. The next morning, when the sound of Laurelyn's joyful, excited cries came in through my open windows, I tried to deny that they filled me with an ominous sense of dread. I cautiously stepped out my door, and sure enough, there was another one. It was right next door to Kikowski's house, the Craner's place, number 2 Willow Wood Crescent. It wasn't identical to the previous one either, clearly made from 3 real, once living pumpkins with its own distinct design carved into them. I don't suppose anyone saw where this one came from, did they? I asked, without much hope, as I approached the crowd of onlookers. its size surpassing the one from the day before. No one, which is pretty damn weird when you think about it, Jeremiah Craner remarked, more confused than concerned by the jack-o'-lantern man's presence. This thing's not exactly light, but there's no marks on the lawn from someone dragging it. Like, it just popped out of the ground where it is. Do you think they're magic? Laurelyn asked, jumping up and down. They're mysterious, Laurelyn. Let's leave it at that for now, Jeremiah replied, not wanting to crush her exuberance. I'm going to ask my Aunt Samantha to come look at these. She's a witch, so she'll know if they're magic, Laurelyn proclaimed. Sweetheart, we've been over this. Your Aunt Sam is not a real witch, Laurelyn's mother reprimanded her gently. Laurelyn rolled her eyes at her mother's rationalism but didn't argue with her. Hey, Kukowski's stack of lanterns been moved, another of my neighbours, Tyler, said. We all turned to where he was pointing, and sure enough, the jack-o'-lantern man was now right up against Kukowski's front window, peering inside. There were no signs of it being hauled across the lawn, not one blade of grass out of shape. And yet there it was, as though it was as portable as an inflatable Halloween decoration. Laurelyn excitedly ran over to the jack-o'-lantern and began knocking on Mr. Kukowski's window, only to scream when she saw what was inside. Her mother and several others immediately ran over to see what was wrong, and as Heidi comforted her daughter, the others either called for an ambulance or tried to break their way into the house. Kukowski had suffered a massive heart attack and was lying dead on his living room floor when Laurelyn had seen him. The EMTs estimated his time of death as just after sunrise. The prevailing theory among the neighbourhood was that the mere sight of the jack-o'-lantern man at his window had been what triggered the heart attack, and most of us wanted to know who had been responsible for putting it there. No one wanted to fess up, and I decided to keep the urban legend I had read about to myself, so no one really had anything to go on. But even without knowing about the legend from Harrowick Hallows, a lot of people suspected that another jack-o'-lantern man would be gracing our neighbourhood come October 3rd. Everyone who had anything that could be used as a security camera made sure that they were set up and activated, and pointed toward house number 3 if it was possible. We also coordinated a watch around our work and sleep schedules as much as we could, ensuring that we had the best chance of catching whoever was responsible for these things in the act. That night, as I kept my vigil on my porch, I saw the lights in both jack-o'-lantern men spring to life, even though I knew nobody would have dared to light them now. Come October 3rd, there was a grand total of 3 jack-o'-lantern men, and the first 2, while still on their original properties, had moved as well. None of our cameras had caught their movement, and by now, we were all starting to get seriously unsettled. Craner most of all. If these things were here to pick us off one by one, then it made sense that he would be next. Tyler was the first one to try to get rid of the damn things, and called some of his friends to help him load them into the back of his pickup truck. I don't remember where he planned on taking them or what he was going to do with them, because it didn't matter. Before he could even get out of the neighborhood, one of his back tires exploded. He lost control and crashed into a street lamp. Thankfully, no one died that day, and Tyler himself was fine, aside from some whiplash. But that's when most of us became convinced that these things were cursed. Every day, a new jack-o'-lantern man would appear at the next house, and the ones who were already present would have changed positions, all without being seen or recorded. They didn't decay as the days ticked by either, always appearing as if they had been freshly carved. Dogs hated them too, but they were probably just picking up on their owner's unease. Nobody wanted to try moving them again, not after what happened to Tyler. There were no more heart attacks or car crashes after that, but the threat the jack-o'-lantern men posed still loomed over us all. Each morning, we would regularly find things broken or missing. The jack-o'-lantern men seemingly to blame. They had a tendency to block off driveways, doorways and garages, or sit in flower beds or play equipment. It was almost as if they were daring us to move them. But we just worked around them, rather than risk it. We didn't talk about them much after the first couple of days, and never within sight or earshot of them. We had come to a general consensus that they were trying to troll us, to egg us into somehow disrespecting them, to give them a license for revenge. It was around the middle of the month when Laurelyn came knocking at my door. When I answered her, I found her standing next to a woman with long red hair, clad in a long red dress and cloak, with a pentagram necklace and a triple moon belt buckle on prominent display. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess that you're the Aunt Samantha. Yes, that's right. I'm Samantha Sumner. I'm a metaphysical counselor and spiritual wellness advisor at Eve's Eden of Esoterica. She spoke confidently, as if those were actually valuable credentials. It wasn't hard to see why Laurelyn's mother had made the decision to distance themselves from her. Laurelyn asked me to stop by, take a look at the jack-o'-lantern entities that have been manifesting in your neighborhood. Yeah, sure. They've just been popping up, one after the other all month. No one wants to just come out and say it's supernatural, but it's pretty damn weird we've never been able to see who's doing this, I admitted, awkwardly rubbing the back of my neck. Well, I can confirm for you that all of these jack-o'-lantern entities are definitely paranormal, she said with confidence. I've been honing my clairvoyance for the past 3 years now, and there's no doubt in my mind that these jack-o'-lanterns are serving as earthly bindings for some manner of non-human spirits. The bindings are strong enough that they can at least manifest some minor misfortunes, and I suspect that at night, and when no one's watching them, they might be able to manipulate the jack-o'-lanterns directly. I see, I nodded, humouring her at first, but unable to deny the fact that I had no rational explanation for how they were moving around and getting fresh candles. Well, do you have any idea why this is happening? Unfortunately, no. I have found records of at least one similar event over a century ago, but I wasn't able to find any clear cause for that either, she admitted. What I do know is that these kinds of spirits demand respect. Don't try to move or damage them, and they'll have no cause to retaliate. You can also buy some goodwill with a token sacrifice, like a coin or a piece of candy. Aunt Samantha and I have already fed Halloween candy to each of the jack-o'-lanterns. I'll feed any new ones to try and keep them from hurting anyone else, Laurelyn said doggedly. She was clearly still shaken by Kukowski's death. Hell, I was too. And it was kind of heartwarming to see how determined she was to keep the rest of us safe. I smiled warmly at her, while her aunt gave her a consoling pat on the back. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "Just avoid disrespecting them, and when yours appears, be sure to honor it with a small sacrifice of some kind," Samantha replied. "For good measure, you can make sacrifices to the rest of them as well. Avoid them at night as much as you can. They're stronger when the veil between the physical and spiritual planes is weaker. It's weaker at night, and it will be the weakest of all on Halloween. I don't know what's going to happen on Halloween, but if you can, avoid offending them. I think you should be okay. If you like, I can perform a blessing on your home. That should make it a little harder for any malicious spirits to harm you. No charge." With a reluctant sigh, I let this potentially crazy woman into my house. She did some kind of little ritual and left me with her business card in case I wanted to invest in any of the protective charms they sold as well. Yeah, there it is. That did make me start to wonder if maybe the whole thing had been some kind of elaborate marketing campaign. But I couldn't deny that Samantha did seem sincere in her convictions. I watched through my window as she and Laurelyn went over to Tyler's house, only to be shooed away like Jehovah's Witnesses. He was still pissed with the jack-o'-lantern men over his truck and neck, and I knew that he wasn't going to follow their advice. Somehow, that gave me a very uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. The next day, I and probably everyone else in the neighborhood were woken up by the sounds of Tyler's cursing. He had gotten his jack-o'-lantern man, and it had appeared on the roof of his truck. It seems that they had finally crossed a line that one of us couldn't abide by, and I watched helplessly as an enraged Tyler climbed up into the back of his pickup truck and furiously shoved the jack-o'-lantern man onto the asphalt below. The pumpkins cracked, but largely remained intact, which Tyler apparently thought was a fate too good for them. He grabbed what I think was a monkey wrench from the toolbox in his truck and just started pulverizing the thing, stomping its hide until it was mush. He was so engrossed in his vengeance that he didn't notice when the parking brake to his truck suddenly gave out and it started rolling down his inclined driveway. I watched as it swerved, seemingly without cause, and crashed into an electric pole. I'm not a physicist, but there's no way that that truck was rolling with enough kinetic energy to topple that pole. And yet somehow, that's exactly what happened. I heard it snap like a tree from a bolt of lightning and saw it fall forward into Tyler's house. Taut power lines snapped, flailed about wildly, and started a fire that would burn Tyler's house to the ground. Even in broad daylight, the smoke and flames from that inferno could be seen for miles. Tyler was devastated, of course, but more than that, he was terrified. A lot of us were terrified. We had no reason to think that burning down Tyler's house would be enough to satiate the jack-o'-lantern's need for revenge. For all we know, Tyler was a dead man, and we might all be next. The day after the house fire, Tyler's jack-o'-lantern man was in one piece again, holding a marshmallow on a stick over the still smouldering rubble. A lot of us decided to leave the neighborhood after that, at least until after Halloween. But not me. Honestly, I didn't think running away would do any good. And if anything, I would just be putting innocent bystanders in danger. I stayed, placing spare change into the mouths of each and every jack-o'-lantern man, exactly as Samantha had said. Today, October 30th, the last jack-o'-lantern man appeared, and it appeared on my lawn. I'm at house number 30, you see, right across the street from Kakowski's house, since it's a crescent and all. I slowly pulled back my curtains, knowing that it would be there, but dreading the confirmation nonetheless. It was the worst one so far. It was bigger too. Bigger than I was in both height and girth. Its face was a monstrous, sneering gargoyle. Its bottom two pumpkins weren't carved to resemble an outfit, but rather medieval depictions of hell, embellished by the candle glowing inside it. I noticed then that not only it, but all the other jack-o'-lantern men had their candles lit in the daytime, and they were burning brighter than they ever had before. Knowing what I had to do, I steeled up my courage and went outside, a bowl of Halloween candy in hand. I fed my jack-o'-lantern man first, then went door to door to feed the rest of them. Laurelyn's family was among those that left, and I promised her that I would keep making offerings to the jack-o'-lantern men. I fortified my house, but what happened to Tyler's place is proof that that won't stop them. I can only hope that we've managed to appease them. They're all here now, all 30 of them, and they've got one night left to do whatever it is they're going to do. Tomorrow, it won't be children, but the jack-o'-lanterns doing the trick-or-treating. And I can only hope that our treats will be enough to stave off their tricks.